The story begins when the school bully insulted the main character and called him a beggar because he is given more money for daily expenses than he spends in a year. He threw a wad of money at him and called him a freak and told him to stay away from Jing. Wang's friends supported him and said how dare the main character compete for the most beautiful girl in class because Wang's uncle is the vice-rector. The whole class hated him and called him a beggar and a stinking dog. Suddenly, Mr. Lee from an international company entered the class. Everyone recognized him because just yesterday the teacher told them about the incident that happened at their place. They didn't understand why one of the executives of Jiangzhou's main company came to their school. At that moment Mr. Lee and his men bowed to the boy, whom the whole class mocked. Everyone was shocked and didn't understand what was happening now. The teacher told them that they probably made a mistake because Sun is an ordinary poor student from a small town. But Mr. Lee told him to shut up, because Sun is the sole heir of the corporation. Wang was horrified. He didn't understand how this pauper could be the heir of an international company. At that moment Sun hit him and called him a freak. Then he walked over to the most beautiful girl of the school, he hugged her and kissed her unexpectedly for everyone. Jing did not know what to say, but at this time Sun told Mr. Lee that it was time for them all to go and they left with him. She was shy and happy, but Wang was crying and could not accept his defeat. Walking down the hall no one knew how Sun went from a poor man to a rich heir. It was like this because Sun was a poor student just 20 minutes ago, but he saw the news that Qingyunzhou Corporation president was killed in a car accident this morning. Sun was upset when he read the news, but he caught himself thinking, what does he even care about this? But suddenly a paper was thrown at him by the class president who was considered the prettiest girl. A friend told him that there are many people in the class who use phones now, but for some reason she only noticed him. He said that she has been interested in him since first year. He asked why he doesn't react to it in any way. Sun said he did not care, but a friend said that so many people are jealous of him and he does not appreciate it. But in fact Sun could not start dating her because he had no money. At this point the strongest system was activated. It notified him that he can change a new identity every week. When he activates and does a new task he will get a random skill for a long time. This gave him the identity of Qingyun International Company chairman. At first sight Hebet at the same time he hides a serious position, the only heir of Qingyun Company, due to the death of the company's president. Today Sun officially succeeds him in this role. He has gained personality skills, such as, business acumen, leadership character and calm temperament. He has been given the task to find out the true death of the president of the company, and he will confront his deputy. Suddenly the teacher finished his lesson and Sun woke up and thought it was a dream, but at that moment Jing came up to him and angrily asked him why he was ignoring her. He tried to walk away from this conversation, but at that moment Wang came up to him and told him that he had warned him earlier not to go near Jing. After which, the events that were described earlier happened. Sun was convinced that he had indeed created a new identity and even other people's memories had changed too. At that time, the assistant vice chairman informed him that Mr. Lee had already returned from Sun's school. She said that their people were a little late. He told her that there was nothing to be done, besides Sun is a little kid who can't do anything. Lee informed Sun that Cheng is the deputy president and he was originally the first candidate for president of the company after the accident, but since Zhao left all the shares to Sun in his will, Cheng is not eligible to take over as president. Sun understood why the deputy began to hate him. The system gave him a month to find the true cause of Zhao's death, and Sun began to suspect Cheng of Zhao's death. Li informed him that Cheng was known for his ruthlessness, and he had many enemies, among them high-ranking positions, but they all disappeared mysteriously. He asked Sun to be careful, because he was only a student. Sun wanted to meet Cheng in person. He told all the trustees to go to the main entrance. The trustees were waiting outside and were very angry with him, but another employee told him to calm down, because it was an order from the new president of the company. But he replied that the new president had no ability or qualifications, and how could he even become president, because only Jing could take the position. Some employees agreed with him and wanted Jing to become president of the company. However, the old employees were against it, and Jing wanted to remove them, after he became president of the company. After a while Sun arrived. He was greeted by Jing cheerfully and introduced himself as the deputy, but Sun told him that he already knew all the necessary information about him. One of the employees saw a drink of tea and milk in his hand and said that he advised him to go back and continue playing computer games because business is war and he doesn't belong here. Sun laughed and asked what kind of dog it was, but Jing asked not to call this employee a dog. The employee was furious and Sun slapped him. He said if this dog doesn't belong to the deputy, but dares to bark, it should be beaten. Then Sun scheduled a meeting in the conference room in 5 minutes. Jing was very angry because Sun was not behaving at all the way he had imagined, so he decided to act just as rudely. Liao's secretary met them at the entrance. Li said that she was absolutely reliable, and if he needed anything, he could just tell her. Unexpectedly, he asked to make him 3 cups of tea in the conference room, but Liao didn't understand why he needed 3 cups of tea at once. 5 minutes later all the executives were in the conference room. Sun introduced himself and wanted to say that as of today he is the president of this company. But at that moment one of the executives interrupted him and wanted to bring up the subject of inheritance, but suddenly Sun threw a cup of hot tea at him and told him to shut up. Sun exclaimed, "Didn't his parents teach him not to interrupt other people?" Then Sun continued and said that as of today he is president. He asked them who was for and who was against. He was ready to listen to everyone and go to their meeting, but everyone was scared. Mr. Li was happy that the former president chose Sun as his successor, because Sun was young but very charismatic. At this point Jing told Sun that he was very young and showed great promise, and with such a director, the company would definitely succeed in many things, but there were tens of thousands of people working in the company and it would be useless to convince just the managers to do anything. But if he could achieve something incredible, like getting a big deal with Taishan Corporation, then no one in the company would dare question his abilities. Suddenly Li stood up for Sun, because the Taishans are their worst enemies and how dare he send Sun to sign documents with them. But Jing threw a glass of water at him and said, "How dare he talk to him like that?" That moment Sun caught the glass of water and proudly said that he would take on this project. Jing said that Sun is very courageous and asked him not to drag out this project and asked if 1 month would be enough for him. Sun said 1 week would be enough for him and announced the end of the meeting. He told Liao to go after him, but Li tried to stop him, because 1 week was not enough and it was impossible. After Sun left with Liao, Jing thanked Li for bringing him here because now he could appreciate this idiot Sun. Chen and his assistants laughed at Sun and Li. And Li's assistants didn't understand how Zhao could choose this jerk, and they wanted to quit this company before it was too late. After a while, Sun asked Li to tell him about how President Zhao died. He said that Zhao had been in an accident and the police had already determined that it was an accident. But Sun couldn't believe it, because if it had been a normal accident, the system wouldn't have made him investigate it. Li said that on his way to the company this morning, President Zhao collided with a truck at an intersection and died. The driver of the truck was taking out trash from the construction site every day at this time, so the accident was not intentional. Sun asked where that driver was now. Li said that the driver has been detained and is now at the police station. Sun instructed Li to go to the police station right away and follow this driver, and most importantly. In a few minutes Liao brought all the information about the president of Taishan Company. His name is Nantian. Xiang began to study all the information and the name Nantian seemed very familiar to him. Suddenly he saw that his classmate Qin Gi's the daughter of the president of Taishan Company. At night Jing was sitting in her room and drying her hair. Her friends were discussing Sun, because he went from a loser to a handsome man, so also the president of the company. Jing noticed Sun wrote her messages and wanted to see her. She was very happy. She quickly got dressed and told her friends she would be coming soon. Walking down the street, unexpectedly someone hugged her and called her a hottie. She got really scared and threw his face on the ground. But it was Sun. Jing awkwardly asked him if he was okay. After which she asked him why she attacked her from behind. But he asked her why does she beat him if he sneaks up on her from behind, but does nothing when he approaches from the front to kiss her. Jing shyly asked, because he's been avoiding her for years, and today he acts very different. Sun replied, because before he was a poor tramp and couldn't provide for her happiness, but as of today he is no longer the poor Sun that everyone knew. Now he is willing to give everything, for her love. Jing didn't expect this and cried with happiness, and all the while thought that Sun didn't love her. He asked her not to cry, and asked if it was true that her father is president of Taishan Corporation. Jing told him that she had already told him that, 5 years ago her father set up his own business and founded Taishan. Sun replied that now he wanted a firm foothold in Qingyun Corporation and for that he needed her father's help. Suddenly he got a call and was told that the truck driver of the accident with President Zhao had passed away. Sun was not expecting this and said he would be here soon. He ran and told Jing that he would call her tomorrow morning. She was upset because she never got to talk to him about her feelings. Sun was in a hurry and was running across the road and didn't notice a car coming at him at high speed. But at the last moment another car hit that car and changed trajectory and their car quickly left the scene. As it turned out he was saved by Mr. Li. He got out of the car and asked if he was okay. After a while Jun informed Cheng that the driver couldn't hit Sun because Li suddenly appeared and saved him. Cheng said it wasn't that important, because he only wanted to scare him and he wasn't stupid enough to kill 2 company presidents simultaneously. Li and Sun arrived at the office. He realized it was a warning and someone wanted him to give up. Li was furious, because if he hadn't arrived in time the consequences would have been beyond repair. Sun asked for an account of what happened to the truck driver. Li said that the driver had actually been under control for a long time, but had suddenly passed away in the detention center, and when he arrived there, the driver was already dead. Also, the driver left a note that said he had no money to pay for the damage and had paid with his life. Sun asked where the driver's family lived. Li said that several years ago the driver divorced and lived alone. Sun told him to check it out, because if someone hired a hitman, the trump card that made the driver agree to give his life could only be a relative. Li got up from his seat and said he would find out right away. The next morning, Luce told her husband and Nantian that he only eats and does nothing else, and why is he not interested in his daughter at all? He asked what happened. Li Shu said that Jing runs after some boy every day, and yesterday, Xiaoqing waited for her all evening. She just refused to come back. Yun asked her mother why she has been yelling at her father since the morning. Xiaoqing asked, hasn't Jing come back yet? Mom said that Jing will be back soon, and told them to sit down to breakfast. She will hurry her up for now. Xiaoqing said if he really doesn't like Jing, he better leave. But Yun told him, how can Xiaoqing being a supervisor, lose to some poor student? Xiaoqing replied that it was just an asset not worthy of attention. Suddenly Jing came home with her boyfriend Sun. All the family members were shocked and didn't understand what the hell just happened. Sun introduced himself to them and told them that he was Jing's boyfriend. He came to them for the first time and didn't bring any gift and only brought some fruit. But his brother was very unhappy about this. He threw his fruit at him and told him to screw off from their house. Sun addressed as Jing's father and called him uncle. He said he had a great family, but did he not manage to raise his son? Yun wanted to hit him for those words, but his father told him to shut up. And turned to Sun and said he admired his flair for business. He asked why did he do such a crazy thing today. He said that Sun was no match for his daughter Jing and told him to get out of here. Sun wanted to answer him something, but Xiaoqing interrupted and asked to let him say a few words. He introduced himself and said he was a young executive of the Sangshan Steel Company, and that he would become president of that company in the future. This moment seemed very familiar to Xu, and He assumed that Xiaoqing was about to pull out his bank card. And so it happened. He tossed him the bank card and told him that there was 1 million in the account, and told him to take it and get out. Jing told Xiaoqing why he was so eager to reveal his identity today, because he usually says he doesn't care about money and doesn't imagine himself as the head of Xiao's company. Xiaoqing replied that he just wants to point some people to their lowly place so they don't dream of a beautiful swan. Suddenly Sun picked up his bank card and Xiaoqing thought he decided to take his money, but at that moment Qing put the bank card in his jacket and said not to throw away the money his father had earned through hard work. Father and mother were surprised by Sun's behavior. Xiaoqing was furious and said it was none of his business. After all, he was a young executive of a company with a market value of 30 billion. Xiaoqing told him to tell him about himself right in front of father and mother Jing so that they could choose who was worthy of their daughter. Sun calmly replied that he was the president of Qingyun Company. All the family members and Xiaoqing were shocked and did not expect it. But Xiaoqing did not believe him. He started insulting him and called him a bastard and a liar. At that time the news was on TV that yesterday, after the sudden death of the former president of Qingyun Company, a 19-year-old boy named Sun, also reported that the market value of his company is $130 billion. Father felt embarrassed because he didn't believe that either that Sun is president. Sun turned to Xiaoqing and said that he would be glad if they would cooperate in the future. He became very uncomfortable and said that he had urgent business and had to go. Sun told him that he came here on business, as his company hopes to cooperate with his corporation Taishan. And replied that he would never in his life have common business with Qingyun, and even if the man is an ordinary poor man he cannot hate him, but if the man is a representative of Qingyun Company then he never dares to come to his house. Jing asked his father why he was being so rude to him, but the father said it was out of the question. Sun said he had already sent people to find out the reasons for the conflict between Qingyun and Taishan. The mother asked the father why can't he do something good for his business, and asked Sun what he could find out about the conflict. Sun replied that according to his result when he and Mr. Zhao were young. But at that moment and grabbed his hand and asked him to be quiet. He said he was willing to sign all the documents with him. Qing found out that and signed the contract and could not believe it. He was told that and was to give an announcement to the board in 2 days. He asked Qing, what did he think about it? Qing said it wasn't logical since Taishan had been feuding with their company for a long time, and how could he agree to some kid's demands? The aide said that maybe it was because Sun started dating Jing, Anne's daughter. Qing was furious and asked why no one told him such important information. The aide said that he himself just found out about it. He asked Qing if he wanted to follow through on his case. Qing said there's no need to do anything. After all, Sun is just a kid, and he won't panic because of him. Besides, he's already figured out how he can handle him. At this time, the system informed Sun that there are 4 days left until the deadline. It told him to complete the task as soon. Sun was surprised, because it turned out that it was much more important to know the truth about Zhao's death than signing a contract. At that moment Li ran to him and said that he found out something extraordinary. The truck driver has a daughter. 3 years ago she went to study abroad, and since then he started working as a driver at a construction site. Sun realized where he was going, because as an ordinary truck driver suddenly had money to send his daughter abroad. Sun realized that the killer is very smart, because he probably planned everything 3 years in advance. Li agreed with him, because they still can't find the source of that money, and since the enemy is very cunning and ruthless, he hired Sun bodyguards, who will walk with him all the time. He said that now he has nothing to worry about since all the bodyguards are elite and ex-military from the Special Forces squad. Sun was shocked and thanked him for this favor. He asked all the bodyguards to come out since he had a question for Li. Sun pulled out a picture of all the leaders and asked him who was the tall man and why wasn't he at the last meeting. Li said that this man's name is Liao Jun, he is not a board member, but a very close person to Cheng. It is said that many embarrassing things Cheng does is through Liao. Li asked him if he wanted to start an investigation with him, but Sun said that he just asked. At this time the secretary was passing Liao in the hallway. He asked her why she could not say hello when meeting with him. She told him to stop following her around the company. He told her to stop talking nonsense, and he had urgent business for her. He wanted to contact her outside the company, but she wouldn't take his call. She replied that it was not her job to help him. But suddenly he grabbed her and said how dare she talk to him like that, because if it wasn't for him she wouldn't be able to be secretary to the president of the company. He said if he wanted to he could make it so that tomorrow she would be kicked out of this company. He told her to listen to him carefully. Because if she didn't want him to die, she should help him. After a while Sun came out of the office, and he told the security guards that they were free as he was going home. But they vigorously exclaimed that they were going to walk him home. He passed the secretary and she asked him to give her a ride home. Her car broke down, but if he had urgent business, she would call herself a cab. But Sun said she didn't need to call a cab and he would only be happy to drive her home. After he gave her a ride home, he wanted to go into her house, but Sue asked him why. He asked her if she wouldn't give him a glass of water as a thank you. The bodyguards wanted to go into her house too, but another bodyguard stopped him, saying that apparently Sun would be drinking water all night and they shouldn't distract them. When they went into her house, Sue got uncomfortable. It was like a mess. He told her that when he lived in the dorm it was much worse. He saw her bra and said that apparently she was wasting all her energy working. But she grabbed the bra from his hands and asked him not to touch her stuff. She picked up the medicine and remembered what Liao told her. He asked her to find a way to be alone with Sun and let him drink the medicine. After which, Sun should have passed out and she should have taken a picture of him with no clothes on. She added the medicine to the water and walked over to Sun. He asked her where her mother was now. She said that her mother was now in her homeland. Sun took the glass in her hands and asked her what was her connection to Liao Jun. This point she got really scared, because her last name was also Liao. She told him that she was not related to him in any way and they were just namesakes. He believed her and drank the water, after which he was about to leave. The medicine had not worked yet and she had to stop him. She said that she had a question that she wanted to consult with him. Sun stopped and said that apparently she didn't want him to leave her today. He sat down on the couch and asked what her question. At this time the bodyguards were standing outside and Sun texted them to turn off the internet in this house within 5 minutes. The bodyguard told the three to pull all the internet cables coming in and eliminate the signal from all the towers in. Sun asked her what question she wanted to ask him. But she was silent, and Sun initially knew that she had given him the drug, but he wondered if she knew it was an aphrodisiac. She asked him if he wanted to sleep. He then became convinced that she herself didn't know what the pill was. He assumed that someone had tricked her into giving her an aphrodisiac, while she thought it was a sleeping pill. Sun thought if she herself didn't know what the pill was, then they were being watched by those who knew what kind of pill it. Sue wondered why Sun wasn't falling asleep, because his face had changed a lot. She thought she had added too much. At that moment a hidden camera was turned on in one of the outlets. Liao and his aides were happily watching this and to see what their new president is capable. She walked up to him and felt that he had a fever. She wanted to take him to the hospital. But when he saw her up close he was almost out of control. He took his phone and saw that there was no connection inside the house and no internet. Everyone who was watching this was very angry because the most interesting thing was just about to start. At that time Sun put her on her back and explained to her that she was very stupid, because she didn't understand exactly how she was going to be used just now. Suddenly he went to another room and told her to bring lots of ice. Sue asked him, exactly how was she going to be used? After a while the bodyguard came home and asked where Sun was now. Sue said he was taking a shower right now. He told her, does Sun get to be the kind of person who does it really fast? That moment Sun came out of the shower and the bodyguard told him that he was still young and didn't know all the ins and outs of how to do it right, but Sun told him to shut up and get busy. Sun said there was a hidden camera in the room. The bodyguard came up to Sue and threateningly asked, was she really going to secretly record everything on video, but she said she knew nothing about it. Sun told the bodyguard to find the video camera, and asked Sue if she knew what the drug was. She said she was given sleeping pills. He told her, did she think that if she took a picture of him without his clothes on it would be enough? Sun told her she was given an aphrodisiac and they wanted to put her under it. Sue couldn't believe it, but at that moment the bodyguard found a hidden video camera in the socket. Sue stood stunned and didn't understand why they wanted to set her up so sneakily. Sun told her that her own father was willing to sacrifice his daughter's honor, for his own selfish purposes. She asked him in surprise, how did he know that? He replied that he just made his guess out loud and apparently the guess was confirmed. Sue told him that Liao Jun was really her father. 15 years ago he left her with her sick mother and went to another woman. 3 years ago she came here to work, and she had no one here. Because of this she was desperate, but suddenly she met him. By then Liao had already held one of the lower management positions in the company. He helped her get a job, and so she was able to avoid starving to death in the alley. Sun asked her, but you still cannot refuse his request. The bodyguard told him that he found 3 more hidden cameras in the bedroom and 1 in the bathroom. He said someone was going to mix the president's good name with dirt. Sun asked her after seeing all this, did she still have doubts about her father? She cried and said she didn't believe it, because maybe he too had been misled. The bodyguard called her a silly girl, but at that moment Sun asked him to stop. He said he was going to eliminate Cheng, but to do that he first had to find a way to get to Liao. To do that he needs her help. He told her if she didn't want it, he wouldn't force her. After a while Sun and his bodyguards left. At this time Sue started to remember how she had been fired from various jobs and called her unnecessary. But the only one who came to her rescue was Liao, so she decided to give him another chance. She was about to enter her father's office, but heard him talking to his friends. His friends told him that they had met many ruthless people, but Liao is on another level. After all, he had turned his own daughter into a pawn and led him on for 3 whole years. Sue heard that her father purposely asked the bosses of all the companies not to hire her, and when Sue was totally desperate, he showed up and reached out his hand. Sue heard the whole conversation and was hysterical. Her friends asked him if he could show them the hidden camera footage. He replied that he would send people to get the memory cards and then he would send them the video. The bodyguard asked him why he didn't get rid of Sue, since she betrayed him in the most brazen way. He replied that people have the hardest time breaking up with family, and he is only her boss, so why would she betray her father instead of him? But he was more surprised by the fact that even the secretary turned out to be Cheng's man. Bodyguard said he could not worry about them, because he and his guys are firm in their loyalty to him. Sun replied that he was happy with the way they were doing their job and he trusts them 100%. Bodyguard thought, because Sun at such a young age runs a multi-billion-dollar company and yet is able to unconditionally trust his subordinates. At the same time, he is surrounded by strong enemies, but does not show a drop of fear, while constantly keeps a working attitude. He noticed that his eyebrows were slightly tense and thought that Sun was solving serious business problems. But at the same time Sun was watching some girl's stream. He thought, can every ugly girl stream nowadays? Late at night Sun returned home and asked his bodyguard to pick him up tomorrow morning. He only had 2 days to complete the task, but he found it strange that he didn't panic at all. He had to deal with serious problems, but he solved them with a cool head. Sun assumed it was all because the system had given him such a temperament. He was about to enter his house, but at that moment Sue ran up and said she wanted to talk to him seriously. Sun told her to go inside and she told him that Liao was just a dog and he had been using her all these years and she was just his pawn. She said that such creatures don't deserve to live on this earth, because Liao was willing to ruin her and now she wanted to repay him in. Sue said she was willing to do whatever Sun said if it would help him get revenge, even if she had to sacrifice herself. Sue told her if she would help him, he would not require her to sacrifice herself, but he would help her accomplish what she wanted and she could get revenge on her father. The next morning, Liao came out of his house and called someone by phone. He told them to wait for Sun to leave before going in. He needs them to get all the cameras. But at that moment Sue came up to him and held out her hand with the cameras. She asked him if this is what he was looking for. She asked him, "What does this mean?" Because not only did he cheat her with the drug, he also installed hidden cameras. He apologized to her and said it was all because of Director Cheng. He wanted everything to go perfectly but gave him the wrong pill and installed hidden cameras in secret from him, and when he found out it was too late. Liao asked her, was it really Sun who discovered those cameras, but she told him to go inside as she was tired. They went into his house and he asked her what happened Sun and did their plan work. But suddenly they were met by Liao's wife. She asked Liao who it was. He told her it was his work colleague. Sue told him it would be better if they talked in his office, because she didn't want to see this woman. They went into his office and she remembered Sun's words. He said to make the game break, she needed to get to his computer. She gave him the video camera and he asked her the memory cards were. But Sue didn't want to give them away for nothing and demanded 8 million from him, otherwise he won't get anything. Liao was at a dead end, because she has everything he needs and without it, he can't destroy Sun. But he didn't want to pay 8 million and said he had to consult with his boss. He went outside and called Cheng. Sue put a flash drive in his computer. She installed a virus. At that time Sun and his programmer found by his bodyguard was trying to find something valuable in Liao's computer. He managed to find one hidden folder, but it was locked with a password, but it was no problem for the programmer. At this point Liao was returning to the room. Cheng was ready to wire him money, but told him to wire her money after he checked the video camera records. He entered the room and saw Sue standing by his computer. He asked in surprise, "What is she doing?" She said he has no conscience because he didn't put her and Mom's picture on his desk. Liao told her to stop talking nonsense and demanded to see the camera tapes because he has the money. But she refused and demanded money from him, and after that she would show him the tapes. Liao told her not to try to cheat him or she would become his mortal enemy. He wired her money and told her to show the tapes immediately. Sue answered him, since he was her father, she would not allow to see such a thing involving her because he just wanted to ruin Sun's relationship with Jing, and told him that she had already sent this video Jing. Liao was furious with her and grabbed her. He told her to give him the tapes or she would not go anywhere from his house. At this time, the Yin family arrived at the main office along with their daughter Jing. Cheng told his assistant to notify everyone that an interim board meeting was about to begin. She came to Sun and informed him that the meeting would begin in a few minutes. Sun stood up proudly and thought it was time for a decisive battle. At this time, Liao told Sue that he didn't have time and he gave her one last chance for her to give him the memory cards. At this point, Cheng called him and told him that An had just arrived at the company with his daughter. Sue told him, because she talked about what she had sent Jing notes. And started yelling at Sun. He said that Qingyun company disrespected Taishan so much that its president Sun cheated on his daughter. He said that if he thinks he can keep dating his daughter, he is a total moron. Cheng was happy about this turn of events. Sun asked him to calm down and if he has something to say, they can talk about it privately in his office. Cheng said Sun being a board member he was unreasonably accused, which means they should all together demand justice. And told all reporters to come into the office if everyone wants justice so badly. The guards tried to stop the journalists, but Cheng told them to let them in, because the presence of the media would serve as proof that their company's good name is not afraid of slander. Sun asked him, "Do they really have to go along with this?" Cheng replied that he just wants to give him a chance to whitewash his reputation. At this point, Jing showed her laptop screen and told everyone that the true picture of what happened could be seen on this screen. At this time, Liao came running into the office and Cheng said, "This is what happens to those who wage war on him." Jing turned on the recording on her laptop where Cheng was talking to Liao about Zhao being too much of a nuisance and he should be killed in the next couple of days. Liao said that the truck driver is ready and can do it tomorrow lunchtime. Cheng and Liao stood there in a stupor. Cheng told them to turn off the recording immediately and told all the journalists not to film this. The journalists realized that the shooting of President Zhao was not accidental, and it was all planned. Cheng told the guards to immediately stop all the journalists and break their phones and cameras. Sun told his bodyguards that it was time for them to act. He told them to take all the guards out so they wouldn't interfere with the journalists. After a few minutes the bodyguards handled all the guards with no problem. Cheng indignantly asked Liao how dare he install a hidden camera in his office. Liao said he recorded their conversation on purpose, for his own safety. But his daughter Sue set him up. A few minutes later Li brought in the cops. They said Sue and Liao were suspected of organizing Zhao's murder, and now they would have to go with them. After a while it was over and Jing happily said they had played their roles very well. The system alerted him that the mission had been completed successfully and to get a new identity he has to give the command. Sun got a new identity, Best Killer. Now in addition to his position as president of Qingyun Company he has another secret killer identity nicknamed Overlord. Traces of his work are seen all over the world. His name is passed from mouth to mouth by military dictators, barons and politicians. No matter who he starts hunting, the victim could never escape him. He later decided to resign to live a quiet life, but his enemy was on his trail and soon his peaceful life would be over. Sun gained personality skills as stealth, camouflage, shrewdness, minimal healing skills, excellent shooting and hand-to-hand combat skills. His mission: he had to solve all the trouble of the new personality and survive. There is no time limit for the mission. The system warned him that once extracted the personality would act constantly. Once the assignment is completed, the skills of the personality will remain with him forever. After a while, Li informed him that the police had confirmed the authenticity of the video, which meant that they could not escape the charge of premeditated murder and faced at least life. But suddenly Sun said he wanted Cheng and Liao to be sentenced to death so that there was no further uncertainty and told Li to arrange it. Li could not refuse him, because Sun met a nemesis for business and takes the opportunity and destroys the problem physically. Although Sun is young, but in determination few can compete with him. Sun threw 5 papers and threw a pen at them. He managed to pierce 5 pieces of paper with a single throw of the pen. This was the skill of a first-class assassin. Sun approached his bodyguard and said he wanted to challenge him. He stood in shock at this offer. He asked to hit him with all his strength, and the bodyguard could not refuse him as Sun insisted on it. He swung around and punched him in the shoulder, but Sun didn't even feel the impact, but the bodyguard fell to the floor in pain. He said Sun was like wearing armor and said that he seemed to have broken his arm. Sun decided to find a sparring partner elsewhere and went to a boxing competition. He was an ordinary spectator, but he saw people fighting in the ring and was very disappointed. He said out loud that it would be too easy to induce them. But a pumped-up boxer heard this and asked, "What did he just say?" He personally raised these fighters. Did he ask Sun, or did he just say some nonsense? Sun answered him that he wasn't here to shout nonsense from the audience. He looked at the boxer menacingly and said that he was absolutely serious, that he would have easily beaten them. With those words he made the boxer angry and he told him to get in the ring with him. Once in the ring he exclaimed how a wimp like Sun had the nerve to say such nonsense. He said that if he lost to him today, he would immediately close this boxing club. Sun told him not to overdo his pathos, because it's only a sparring session. Suddenly Xiaoqing came there. As it turned out, he was the one who invested a lot of money to open this boxing club. He saw Sun standing in the ring and thought, what the hell is he doing here? Before the fight, a man from Xiaoqian approached the boxer. He told him if he beats Sun, Xiaoqian will give him 1 million. He was happy about this condition, as with this money he will be wealthy for life. Xiaoqian asked what the trainer had to say about this fighter. He said that he brought him in from overseas for a fortune. His nickname is Wild Monster, and he used to fight illegally. He said that it wouldn't take him 10 seconds to break Sun's nose. At that moment, Wild Monster swung and wanted to hit him with all his might, but Sun easily dodged his attack. Xiaoqing started getting worried, but the coach asked him not to get nervous, as what just happened was nothing more than an accident. Sun said that he wanted to test his strength and fighting skills and told the boxer to hit with all his might. He was furious at him and exclaimed that Sun had made the worst mistake of his life. And since he asked for death from his heart, he would not deny him. The trainer saw that his fighter was very angry and said that now there was no stopping him. Xiaoqing said this is what happens when someone takes his beloved girlfriend away. The Wild Monster began to deliver a series of punches, but Sun dodged every one of his attacks. He asked him if he could punch faster or was that all he could do. He replied that Sun acts like a rat and runs away from him all over the ring. He exclaimed, could he hit him just once? Sun didn't want to punch him in the face, so he decided to punch him in the arm the moment he would attack him again. He caught the right moment and hit him right in the arm, and the Wild Monster's arm broke. Everyone was shocked by this, as no one would have thought this could happen. Sun himself did not expect it that he himself became so strong. Xiaoqing wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible, but suddenly Sun addressed him through the big screen. Xiaoqing stopped and Sun approached him. Xiaoqing was really scared and was surprised to say it was such a coincidence and asked him what he was doing here. The guards told Sun to keep his distance, but he grabbed them and turned to Xiaoqing. Sun said he heard everything, when the trainer told his fighter that Xiaoqing was willing to pay him $1 million if he beat him. Xiaoqing said in fear that it was nothing more than a coincidence. Sun warned him to make it a first and last time because he's not interested in him, but if he keeps scheming against him, he'll kill him. Then he let him go and left. Xiaoqing and his men bowed before him and wished him well. Viewers saw this and talked about how Xiaoqing's tough guy image had crumbled and he was a common coward. Sun called his girlfriend and offered to have lunch together, but she said that she was at school now, and that if he continued to skip classes, he would definitely get expelled sooner or later. Sun replied that he had already talked to the rector, and next week he would donate 3 million to the university to establish an educational foundation, and the rector in turn will help him with the session. At this time Sun was being watched from the roof of the building. The girl would never have thought that the Overlord would be so young, but the guy told her that he didn't care, because soon he would be a corpse. After all, he had spent a long time to find him, but suddenly Sun noticed them. The girl nervously told him that he seemed to notice them. The guy didn't understand how he could have noticed them from such a distance. Sun thought it was Xiaoqian sent someone to get his head, but he realized that Xiaoqian would not have had time so quickly. He guessed it was his old enemy's his new identity. He called his bodyguard and told him to increase his security. After a while he reported back to him that he had added 30 men to the guards, and they had also installed infrared sensors around his villa to guard the perimeter. And now, if anyone comes near here, it will be immediately known. Sun thanked them for their good work and allowed them to rest. His enemies saw that Sun had increased his guards, and thus they realized that he had found out about everything. The girl said that no wonder he had retired, since he resorted to such primitive methods of securing himself, and when the best among the best is no longer. At this time Sun thought, because using such methods of protection should increase their vigilance and should convince them that there is cheese in the absence of a serious mousetrap. And after that break their backbone in one motion. But the main question is how to choose the best moment to lure the snakes out of their burrows. Suddenly someone called him on a hidden number. He picked up the phone and called him Lord and asked how he was doing. Sun recognized his voice. It was Tony. He was the Lord's agent, but he didn't understand why he suddenly contacted him, after all the Lord had gone to live a quiet life. Sun asked him how he had the guts to call directly to his number. After all, in their business you don't do business that way, he asked, or did he forget the rules? Tony happily replied that he went against their rules for a reason, because there was a big order for him, and an easy one at that. Sun was curious about the offer and asked to hear more about it. Tony said that the target was just in China, right near him, and the most important thing, the customer was very generous and willing to pay $3.5 million. Sun was shocked, and asked how serious the target must that the customer is willing to give such a huge amount. Tony said his target is only the president of one corporation, and for him it will be very easy. He said that the target information will send him an email. Sun opened his email and were horrified, as he saw his picture and information about himself. At that time Tony was relaxing on the beach with beautiful girls, and after a while Sun called him. Tony asked him if he was interested in the offer. But at that moment Sun told him to tell him the name of the customer immediately, who ordered the killing. Tony didn't understand why he demanded the name of the customer, and besides he couldn't talk about it. But Sun said one way or another he would still get what he wanted. He asked Tony if he didn't think he would get it. Tony was scared for his life and said he would definitely tell everything he knows about the customer. Tony said that the customer is Han Xiaoqing. He is the son of a group owner. Sun laughed angrily and exclaimed that this son of a bitch Xiaoqing is looking to die. Suddenly his girlfriend came to him and asked what he is doing here and why he can't be reached. He asked her in surprise, what is she doing here? She was very angry at him, because he offered to have dinner with her as a thank you. Jing grabbed his hand and said does he imagine how difficult it was for her to book a table at that restaurant, and if they miss it now, he will have to compensate her. Sun awkwardly replied would definitely make it up to her. They went outside and Sun told the bodyguard to take some helpers with him and tell them to follow him. His enemies saw Sun leave the house and the guy asked the girl if they should follow him, but the girl said there was no point, and it was too early to make their move today. Because judging by his actions he had already spotted them, and now they needed to wait for reinforcements. Sun and Jing arrived at the restaurant and found that they had missed their table, as they were half an hour late and now the next reservation will only be available a month later. At this point Sun was talking to someone on the phone and she asked him what he was doing at this. He told her that he was buying this restaurant and they would have dinner here tomorrow. 10 minutes later they arrived at her house and she asked him to wait as she wanted to make him some noodles. He asked her if there was nobody else home besides the two of them. She said her brother was abroad and her mother and father were in a meeting. Suddenly he hugged her and she shyly asked him, what was he doing? He looked into her eyes and kissed her. She didn't know how to react to this and asked him to stop. Jing said she wasn't ready, but Sun said she had nothing to fear and kissed her again. But unexpectedly mother and father came home and turned on the light. Sun and Jing jumped up from the couch and she asked her parents, aren't they supposed to be in a meeting now? Her father nervously told her that the meeting had moved. Sun said that they just got it all wrong, because they were just looking for the light switch in the dark, tripped and fell on the couch. Her father yelled at him and asked, did he unzip his fly to make it easier to find the light switch? He asked if he thought he was stupid. Sun replied that his pants were just low quality. Sun was very embarrassed and said he had to go as he had other things to do and said good night. When the bodyguard went outside he was surprised and asked why he had finished so quickly again. Sun nervously told the bodyguards that they were dismissed and told them to get the hell out of here. He got in his car and didn't understand why the assassin still hadn't shown up. Since he had already let the guards go he thought he wouldn't be able to meet them today to vent his nerves. But he remembered he still had Xiaoqing to vent his nerves on. He arrived at his hotel and there were two guards standing near the entrance to the room. Sun asked them, "Is Xiaoqing there?" They told him it was none of his business and told him to get the hell out of here. But at that moment he hit the first guard. He flew away a few meters. The second guard didn't understand what just happened and Sun thought he should learn to control his power. The guard pulled out his gun and wanted to shoot, but at the last moment Sun stopped him, and thanks to his gun skill she blocked the mechanism so the guard couldn't take a shot. Then he hit him in and the guard lost consciousness. At that time Xiaoqing heard strange sounds behind the door and didn't understand what was going on there. He opened the door and exclaimed that if they didn't shut up now he would break both their legs. But only Sun was standing by the door and he greeted him happily. Xiaoqing stood in a stupor and asked in surprise, "What is he doing here?" Sun said it was a personal matter and told all the girls to leave this room. He said that Xiaoqing must be full of energy since one is not enough for him. Xiaoqing said if he is interested, he can personally choose some elite girls and send them to his address, after which Xiaoqing apologized again for the incident that happened this afternoon during the boxing. But Sun told him that he didn't come because of what happened this afternoon. At this point, backup for Xiaoqing came to their room. He hid behind their backs and said how dumb you have to be to come to him alone. Sun laughed and said it was like he was waiting for him to visit. Xiaoqing exclaimed that he publicly shamed him. Did he really think he could get away with it? He only recently managed to gather these people to deal with him, but for some reason he came here himself. Sun was only happy about this, because if he had taught Xiaoqing alone he wouldn't have had the feeling of victory. Xiaoqing said that even before death he wouldn't shut his mouth. He told his men to beat Sun so that he couldn't smile anymore. They started attacking him but Sun handled everyone with ease. Xiaoqing got scared and told them to grab him. But in just a few seconds all his men were already unconscious. Xiaoqing was horrified and asked him who he even was that he could handle so many armed men in a few seconds. Sun handled the last bandit and asked Xiaoqing if he had any other options left. Xiaoqing replied if he has the courage, let him kill him, otherwise they won't finish with him, because even if he is not killable, can he guard his girlfriend Jing around the clock? After all, he only has to call one person once and she will be kidnapped and a couple hundred men will take her around. Xiaoqing exclaimed to him that stop hitting him. Sun told him that if he touches Jing, he will find 100 ways to make his life worse than death. Xiaoqing said he's not afraid of him, because he is only the president of the company, or does he already think he's a god? Sun said that his worst decision in this life is to spend $3.5 million for his head. Xiaoqing was in a stupor and did not understand how he knew about it, because he turned to an elite agent and only Agent Tony and a killer nicknamed Overlord could know about it. Sun grabbed him and told him that he is the Overlord. Suddenly someone shot at them and Sun managed to react with a dodging shot grabbing Xiaoqing behind him. Sun asked him in surprise, did he put his men on guard too? Xiaoqing was horrified and answered that his men wouldn't shoot at him in rapid succession. Sun decided to check it out and grabbed Xiaoqing by the hair and lifted his head, and at that moment the sound of gunshots rang out again. Then Sun became convinced that it was a completely different people, because if they were Xiaoqing's men, they wouldn't have shot him. Sun assumed they were the killers who had followed him this afternoon. He saw them on the roof of the building opposite the hotel. The killer saw Sun running out of the room, but before he did, he threw a red cloth that signaled the start of the duel. Killer aimed for the hotel exit waiting for Sun, but after a while he was shot in his left shoulder. He was confused by the fact that he was shot with a chopstick. As it turned out, Sun came out on the roof of the hotel, launched the food stick at him as if with a rifle, and also hit him from 250 meters. The killer understood why he was called a lord. The killer threw a smoke grenade and Sun thought, did he really decide to escape at the slightest difficulty? Killer stretched out a rope and started to run away, as the Overlord appeared to be too strong, for if he could take him out with his chopsticks, what else could he do? But on the other floor of the building Sun was already waiting for him and kicked him in the stomach. Killer pulled out his gun and started shooting at him, but at that moment Sun had already dodged his shots and suddenly disappeared from his sight. Then Sun kicked him in the face and said that compared to him he was just a turtle. Sun grabbed him by the throat and asked him who sent him to him. The hitman said that he wasn't considered the king of hitmen for nothing, because he had just made sure of that. Sun gave him 10 seconds to tell him who sent him to him, otherwise he would miss his chance to stay alive. He wanted to say the name of his employer, but at that moment he pulled out a knife and tried to stab him, but Sun reacted and let him go. After which Sun said that he didn't care because he could find his employer without his help. But at that time the help arrived below and the killer fell on the roof of the truck. The helpers started shooting at Sun. The girl got out of the car and told him to catch him immediately and not let him escape. She told him that he was badly hurt, but the hitman said he had a few broken bones and it was nothing serious. The helpers went up to the roof, but reported that no one was there anymore. The girl was furious, because they had just missed the legendary Overlord. The guy told her that they needed to get out of this place as soon because the police will be here very soon. He told her that the Lord is a very scary man and they need to be extremely careful, but the girl told him that after they come back, he himself will have to justify himself to the boss. Then they got in their cars and left for the boss. But they didn't know about the fact that Sun had hid and latched onto the bottom of the car. After a while they went to the boss and told him about the situation, but he was very angry with them. He said he was paying them a lot of money, and not even a hair fell off the Overlord's head. Killer apologized to him for that. He was overconfident and thought he could handle him alone. He asked for another chance and he would definitely do his errand and eliminate the Overlord. The boss told them that he was sailing out on his liner in 3 days and if they hadn't resolved the Overlord issue by then he will settle the matter with them. The guy said that they need to work out the whole plan as much as possible and they no longer have the right to make a mistake. The girl offered to settle the matter with the Lord's girlfriend. At this time Sun was watching their conversation and recognized their boss. His name is Confronting Wilson. 7 years ago he lost a big sum of money to the Lord at the races in New York, which caused him to lose 3 fingers. Many years have passed and he is still trying to get revenge. After a while Sun called his girlfriend. She was not expecting his call and asked why he was calling her so late. He asked her if she wanted to go on a cruise. After a while Sun and Jing were in a 5-star hotel. She saw the view from the hotel and was incredibly happy. She asked him how he found this place, because it was so beautiful. Sun replied that it was nothing special and there are many places in the world much more beautiful than this. He hugged her and said they could go wherever she wanted to go and then he kissed her. She was very happy to be near him. She said she was going to take a shower and then go straight to the beach. Sun was hungry and asked her if she wanted to eat first before going to the beach. He saw her silhouette and thought, why did he become so noble? After a while he sat down to eat, but before doing so he called the bodyguard and asked what the situation was like at home. Lu told him that they were managing to lead them around so far, they hadn't noticed him leave and they thought he was still in the office. Lu said he had nothing to worry about and they would detain them. Sun thought, while the hitman was following his double, Confronting Wilson has no idea that he's already turned from hunter to prey, and if his information is correct, Wilson's liner will arrive by tonight. Suddenly a girl named Yujo comes up to him and asks him if she can sit down with him. No empty tables. Sun let her sit at his table and all the guys and men were surprised by her beauty. Yuzo thought, since she sat next to him and he didn't even look at her once, she assumed that he's just shy. Or maybe he's playing hard to get and thinks he can make her interested in him. But suddenly Sun got up and left. He didn't understand why he didn't even look at her. She thought, is she in his eyes completely unattractive? That time a luxury liner arrived at the place where Sun was. All the people were surprised as they had never seen such luxury yachts before. Sun was happy about it as he had been waiting for this liner with Confronting Wilson in it for a long time. Sun disguised himself so no one would recognize him and told his girlfriend that they were about to go up to this fancy liner. Jing asked him if they could go up on it. Everyone waited in line while two employees checked the tickets at the pier, letting them in. If they had a ticket, the girl asked Sun if he had them, because they were bought a year in advance. Sun opened his mouth slightly to answer, but a man walked past him, touching his shoulder with his shoulder. The man turned around, looking unhappy and telling him to watch where he was going. Sun raised his hand, asking for his forgiveness. The guy's mustache looked realistic, as if he had always had it, and the corners of his lips lifted, creating a smile. He winked at the girl, taking out 2 airline tickets with a smile on his face, telling her that he had them. The girl's eyes opened wide, paying attention to the tickets that the guy was holding. She was surprised to ask him how he could. Sun covered her mouth with his hand, looking slightly nervous. The girl looked at him with dissatisfaction. The guy asked her not to make noise and be quieter. He came close to her ear, saying that he had checked this guy in advance, and he was involved in illegal gambling and making dirty money. The girl listened to him carefully, while her eyes opened wide. Sun asked her if such a scoundrel could enjoy life. And Jing began to think about his words, expressing seriousness on her face. She opened her mouth to say something. Her eyes shone with impatience, and instead of the usual pupil there was a star. She enthusiastically said that in this case they need to go faster. There was a smile on her face. She blossomed at the guy's words, grabbing his hand and dragging him towards the ticket check, and said that if they were late, the liner would sail away without them. Sun was not surprised by this reaction. With a neutral expression on his face, he thought that the girl was very suggestible. Wealthy people stood near the guy. Sun decided to look at them out of the corner of his eye, noting to himself that the passengers were not simple people, and after the arrival of the liner almost no one got off, but a large line lined up inside, which looked like a closed party. Sun grinned insidiously. An ominous aura appeared around him. Looking straight at the liner, the guy thought that no matter Wilson's idea, he would still outplay him. A glass of red liquid was thrown into the guy's face. He closed his eyes so that the drink wouldn't get into them, expressing discomfort at such actions towards him. The glass rolled further, leaving drops on the floor. The man sat and looked at him. There were girls opposite him. He asked the guy if he was here to spend a vacation. Wilson looked angry. Flames burst around him, depicting true emotions. Poking at the guy, he asked where the Lord's head was. The guy began to wipe his face from the drink that had been spilled on him. He calmly looked at the man and replied that his people had prepared an ambush along the way of work, and if Sun did not die, then his limbs would at least turn into puree. The girls did not leave his side. One of them poured a drink into the glass. Wilson angrily continued to address him, saying that if he screwed up again, he would not see the sun tomorrow. The girl and the guy came into their room, saying with a serious expression that everyone had come on board. The man's hand held onto a beautiful cane, which was covered with some kind of stones on top. Wilson stood up, his face changing into a polite one, and with a small smile he replied that he would go greet the guests. The hall was huge and well lit. There were a lot of people, which is why each of them crowded, waiting for Wilson to come out. And Jing looked at the girl who was smiling. She asked with interest why everyone was crowded here, and they bought tickets purely for the sake of chatting in the lobby. Sun looked at the other people who were next to him, calmly answering that people get tickets in order to gamble big, and as soon as the liner starts moving, then the fun will begin. The girl shuddered, expressing surprise at this answer. Her eyes looked like 5 kopecks. She said that in this situation they urgently needed to leave. Sun looked at her with a small smile, hugging her and assuring her that everything would be okay. Because he was nearby, the girl stared at him in amazement. People were excitedly talking about something. Yan Yurua came out from the corner, looking somewhere with interest, being away from others. The guy immediately noticed her, looking warily in her direction and asking himself why she was without company and whether she came to play. People, having heard the address, began to look towards the voice, with smiles on their faces. Su Sun and Jing trembled. The girl was interested in the speech, while the guy looked carefully. There were guards next to Wilson, carefully watching everyone from above. He held a glass of drink in his hand, kindly saying that the next 3 days on his ship would be the best for them. Wilson looked at the people with curiosity, a small smile appearing on his lips as people shouted his name. Sun looked at him confidently while people shouted next to them, a smile appeared on his face from his plans. He thought to himself that these days would be Wilson's last. The girl who was watching the game kindly asked the players if they were going to raise the bets, while behind her the man threw the cards on the table with excitement on his face. The man held cards in his hands that only he could know about, looking at them calmly and without expressing any emotions. He said pass. Another man also looked at his cards, looking at them calmly, trying not to show his emotions and also passing. Another player held cards in his hands, looking at them with a smile on his face, raising the bets. Sun was sitting and playing something on the machine, looking at him with a bored look. The girl looked at the people who were gambling and asked him if they were playing, beat the landowner. The guy said that they were just passing the time, because the liner did not enter international waters. The guy directed his gaze in the other direction, with a serious expression on his face, thinking that Wilson was careful and it would take a lot of time to find him. Sun turned his head away. Behind him stood Yen Yurua, who was playing with the man. She looked joyful. Yen Yurua held the money in her hands with a smile on her face, blushing slightly. She blossomed and began to say with an exclamation that she had won. The guy, hearing her voice, directed his penetrating gaze towards Yen Yurua. Because of the victory, Yen Yurua offered to play more. The man with a smile on his face told the girl that luck was smiling on her and at this rate she could get rich. Sun continued to carefully look in her direction, smiling slightly and noting to himself that she was just a girl from a rich family. The man turned to Wilson, pointing at the monitors, saying that they would be in international waters in an hour. Wilson was looking towards the monitors, holding a cane, and there was another guy next to him. Wilson poked at one of the screens where Yen Yurua was and asked the man who she was. He immediately looked with interest towards the monitors, paying attention to her. There were cards on the table. The girl looked very pleased, talking about something with delight, and from her reaction it was clear that Yen had won again. Wilson continued to look at the screen while the man in the lists tried to find her, carefully flipping through the pages and answering that he would check. Wilson watched with interest, saying that there was no need to check. The man stopped looking in the lists and turned in his direction, confused. A smile appeared on his face. He looked as if he was planning something and said out loud that it doesn't matter who she is, since the girl is on his liner, then Yen Yurua belongs to him. The men in black stood behind her. One of them approached her and kindly said that their boss was inviting him to have coffee with him. Yen Yurua smiled contentedly, answering that she still had 2 more cards in her hands. Realizing his words, the girl turned in his direction, opening her mouth and eyes wide, expressing her amazement and staring questioningly. She turned away from them, changing her face. Holding 2 cards in her hands, she said that she didn't know their boss and let him drink coffee with someone else. In her direction, unnoticed, they put a knife in her back, threatening her with this action and answering that he just wanted to get to know her. The man continued to hold the weapon, looking at her and asking her to follow them. Yen Yurua trembled from such actions, holding the card in her trembling hands. From excitement, beads of sweat appeared on her face. She blushed and looked at them with some apprehension, asking if they didn't even imagine what would happen to them. The man continued to smile kindly at the girl, answering her that she needed to go, because the boss's patience was not unlimited. Yen Yurua walked ahead, looking sad, while 2 men walked behind her, directing her to the right place. One of them smiled, the other was closely watching everything. Jing cried out in satisfaction about her victory. Blush appeared on her face. Sun turned towards Yen Yurua and watched closely, without answering the girl. The guy, crossing his arms over his chest, looked at the monitors Wilson was looking at, noting to himself that the girl had courage since she came on board alone. The guy continued to look at the screens until he saw something that made him flinch and stare at what he saw. Sun, holding his hat with his hands, began to leave the room. Walking along the red carpet, a waiter walked past him, carrying glasses of drink. The guy, looking at it, asked to show the face of Sun, who was wearing a hat. He carefully began to fulfill the request that was stated. The man typed something on the keyboard, checking each camera. He said that his face was not visible on any of them and he managed to avoid getting his face into the lens of dozens of cameras. From such an answer the guy shuddered, not believing his words. Poking his finger at the monitor where Sun and Jing were sitting with his back to the camera, they were playing some kind of game on the slot machine. He turned to his interlocutor, saying that Sun had been sitting in one place for a long time and the cameras had never managed to catch his face. which meant that he was doing this professionally. Beads of sweat began to appear on the guy's face, his expression was astonished, and he realized that Yen Yurua had a bodyguard. Yen Yurua was forcibly dragged to Wilson. Despite all the words about letting her go, the men held her hands so that she would not escape, and there was dissatisfaction on her face from the whole situation. One of them walked into Wilson's room, bowing his head as a sign of politeness and telling him about Yen Yurua's presence. The other man continued to hold her hands, turning them a little behind her back. He was slightly indignant at this behavior and said that he would give her money. Tears appeared in the corners of the girl's eyes. She replied that her family already has a lot of money. Sun carefully leaned out from the corner, looking carefully at the whole picture of what was happening, finding Wilson's location, noticing to himself that he was an old pervert. Sun confidently decided to leave the place in which he was hiding, as if on a stage. A fishing line appeared in front of him, and when he saw it, the guy's eyes opened wide, forcing him to stop. Behind him, someone was holding a fishing line in his hands. His gaze instantly darted back, causing him to fall into a slight daze. The guy stopped the wire near his neck with 2 fingers. He mentally asked himself the reason for this wire here. Johann was unhappy that the guy stopped her so easily, pursing his lips at such an unexpected action. The man, still dissatisfied, decided to use his knee to aim at Sun's lower back, slightly forcing his body to bend forward. The guy's gaze changed to a penetrating one, still looking out of the corner at the man who was behind him, telling him to look at his abilities. He moved his leg back, closer to Johann's leg, lifting it so that the man lost his balance. The man's eyes widened. Sun aimed his elbow closer to his thigh, pushing him back, still holding the wire in his hands. Johann was in a daze. Sun called him worthless. He abruptly grabbed his hand tightly with both of his hands. On his palm there was a wrapped wire that the man was holding. Sun held him and pulled him forward. Johann flew above him, with a shocked expression on his face. From such shenanigans Sun's hat flew off, landing on the floor. The man plopped down on the floor, his expression showing pain, his teeth chattering slightly. He mentally asked himself where the bodyguard got such a reaction and dexterity. Sun clenched his hands into fists, even without looking at the man he had just knocked down. He told him to get up, because he had not played enough yet. Johann raised his head in his direction, trying to look at his face. Sun looked straight at him, and from his voice and expression, one could understand that the man had disdained him. As soon as other people began to approach them, asking about the noise, Sun immediately began to leave from there, leaving his hat next to Johann, who was looking at his back. A concerned man approached him, asking about what had happened. Johann rose slightly, resting his hand on his knee, continuing to look dissatisfied. He frowned, beginning to suspect the so-called bodyguard of something, noting to himself that he had seen his face somewhere before. He turned to 2 men who had come to the noise, with a demanding expression on his face, saying that Wilson was being hunted and it was worth strengthening security, not letting anyone outside in. The men accepted his words. Yen Yurua pressed herself against the wall, trembling with fear. There were tears in the corners of her eyes. Wilson gradually approached her, and on one of the tables there were glasses of booze, as well as the bottle itself. Wilson looked at her with a wide smile, addressing her as a beauty and telling her not to be nervous and nothing bad would happen. The girl looked back worriedly, trembling with fear and practically crying. She begged him to let him go. She still stood near the wall, never ceasing to tremble. Wilson only began to stretch his hands towards her, responding with a laugh and telling her not to resist. Yen Yurua quickly moved to the other side, slightly lifting and bending her arm, hitting the pillar the vase was on, causing the item to swing in the other direction. The vase could not stay in place, falling and breaking into many large or small pieces. Small tears accumulated in the corners of her eyes. She cowered and cried out in fear, asking for help, hoping to be heard. The 2 men who brought her to Wilson entered the room, opening the doors wide and holding weapons in their hands. One of them asked worriedly if everything was okay. Both held their weapons closer to them. One of them looked wary. The man yelled at them in displeasure for their actions, asking them what could be wrong and threatening to throw them overboard to the sharks if they bothered him again. The men began to leave. One of them smiled broadly and told the other that the boss should have fun as he pleases, and their task is to watch the door, past which no one can slip past. The man approached the girl even closer. She turned away from him and slightly moved in the other direction, with a cautious expression on her face again asking for help. Wilson was amused by Yen Yurua's reaction, looking at her with contempt, as if she were some kind of thing. He added that the louder she screams, the more it turns him on. Sun held on to the rope, heading towards Wilson's room, his foot clinging to the floor. He said that it was time to teach the man a lesson. He flew into his room, holding on to the rope and breaking the window with his foot with a characteristic sound and letting a couple of glasses into the room due to the impact. Wilson, looking at this, opened his eyes wide. Beads of sweat appeared on his face, making him feel in some kind of danger. He turned his head, opening his mouth wide and screaming, his face showing that he had become terrified. Wilson's face met Sun's fist, punching him hard enough to draw blood, while he still kept his mouth open. The men stood calmly near the doors, guarding them, not reacting in any way to the screams of their boss that had just been heard. One of them asked, as if suspecting something, "What does it mean?" Because he never spoke loudly like that, the man with a smile only answered that he would do the same. Wilson's face was covered in blood and fresh bruises, his nose began to bleed, and a tooth flew out from behind his mouth. Sun squatted in front of him, saying that he didn't expect the man to be so weak and to pass out in one blow. Yenurua stopped trembling, but her tears did not disappear from her eyes. Looking at Sun in surprise and asking who he was, the guy flinched from her voice. Sun, with a smile on his face, took off his mustache and glasses, kindly reminding her that they ate at the same table a few hours ago, wondering if she had forgotten him after such a time. The girl, hearing his words, began to confidently move forward with her steps towards Sun. She ran straight into him, continuing to cry, her face turning red from tears. The girl said that he had no idea how grateful she was to him. Sun looked at her with wide eyes in a daze, not knowing what to say to her words and such a reaction. From one of the announcers in the room, a voice was heard that addressed Su Sun, saying that they know that he is on board and if he wants Jing to remain alive, he should come to them. From such words the guy was horrified. The liner was sailing somewhere along the desired course. From above, there were beach umbrellas and seats on the liner, and a seagull flew past the liner. Many guards stood waiting, one of them was holding a weapon in his hands, and further away from them were other persons, holding Jing hostage. A light bulb shone on the elevator, attracting the attention of those next to it. Each man in black pulled out his weapon, pointing it towards the elevator that was about to open. The elevator door began to slowly open, and the light bulb above it still continued to shine. The elevator door began to open, revealing Wilson's clothes, which were tattered. There were no numbers on the elevator sign, it just glowed green, indicating that the elevator had arrived. Sun stood behind Wilson, holding his shoulder and looking at him with a wicked smile. The man's face was beaten, expressing panic, his hands were shaking, and he ordered everyone to immediately let go of their weapons. Sun seemed to be hiding behind a man who was surprised by what was happening. Sun looked towards the man who was holding Jing hostage, saying that he was not completely useless. Johann put the gun to the temple of the shocked girl, who had tears appearing in the corners of her eyes. She turned to him while the man thanked him for his kind words, speaking about the camera footage and noting that this was his most disastrous case, leaving the girl alone. Sun winked at them, replying with a small smile on his face that he had absolutely everything under control. Johann pointed his gun towards Wilson and Sun. The girl was still in a panic, beads of sweat were dripping down her face. The man said that he was in a hopeless situation. Sun silently, holding Wilson next to him, looked back at them without reacting. Sun held a knife to the man's neck, asking him if they were his subordinates, saying that they were not listening to him at all. Wilson flinched and raised his hands, telling them to put down their weapons. He turned to Rizzo and George, who were still holding their weapons. The man asked them if they were deaf and ordered his men to let go of their weapons. Johann's face changed, looking at the boss with contempt and asking him for forgiveness. Rizzo glanced at Wilson out of the corner of her eye, telling him that Johann was more generous than him. She turned to them completely, with a smile on her face, saying that after his death, the three of them could equally divide his assets, and the offer turned out to be tempting. The man's eyes bulged slightly, and with horror on his face and anger, he began to yell at them, remembering how many years they had been feeding from his hand. Johann asked him to shut up and said goodbye to him, shooting towards Wilson and Sun without any hesitation. The girl screamed, turning to Sun, tears came from her eyes, she looked at them with concern. The bullet began to fly in their direction. Sun's gaze was turned to it, forcing them to become confused and come up with something. He flew around the corner as fast as he could, hiding from the bullet he might get. Sun managed to hide around the corner, while Wilson was hit directly in the forehead, as if it were his apple, causing him to fall to the floor. Sun pressed himself as close to the wall as possible when they began to attack him further, trying to hit him. Johann turned to the Lord, holding the girl closer to him, extending his hand forward and telling him to be brave, go out and accept his death. The guy was still hiding near the wall from the bullets, pointing his hand towards the weapon that was closer to his leg, thinking that Wilson was gone, but the notification about the completion of the task did not arrive. He opened a few more weapons that he hid under his jacket, grabbing one of them with his hand, thinking that many people would not survive. Johann followed Sun with fury on her face, not allowing him to leave, and Jing still looked worried, her mouth parted as if about to say something. Many of his subordinates rushed at Johann's order, shouting, their faces filled with indignation. Sun came out from the place where he was hiding, not hesitating at all in front of them and pointing several of his weapons towards Johann's subordinates. 2 weapons hit 2 men straight in the hearts, one of them was in a daze, having not predicted such a turn of events. In the next one, the weapon also hit an important organ, contaminating his jacket with blood, the man froze, in a daze. Another subordinate, with anger and some apprehension, without delay pulled the trigger of the weapon, aiming towards Sun. Sun looked attentive, calculating everything in his head and trying to prevent all possible hits by moving at a good speed. He grabbed the body of one and his subordinates when several bullets flew at him, they hit the man, leaving traces of blood and new holes. Johann didn't believe what was happening, opening his mouth slightly to shout about it, looking irritable. The girl's eyes opened wide, and her pupils narrowed, redness appeared under her eyes from tears, the tears still did not leave her face, she also could not believe what was happening. The man, holding a weapon in his hands, looked exhausted, not expressing any emotions on his face. Sun still held the body of his subordinate like a shield, it was on his shoulder, not looking to the sides but only straight, he pointed the weapon in the other direction, throwing it clearly from his hands. The knife flew straight into the lantern, breaking the glass into small pieces, continuing its trajectory, the weapon ended up in another lantern, also breaking the glass into fragments and hitting the light bulb. Sun leaned over, continuing to think about something, a man nearby shouted in surprise, many began to shout about the light, warning where the guy might be. Sun continued to swing his weapon towards his subordinates, again releasing the knife at the desired target. It hit 2 people at the same time, staining the areas it hit with their blood, one of them opened his mouth in shock, the second did the same, slightly raising his free hand to the point of impact. George's face was sweaty, he tried to panic and shouted to everyone to stop panicking in close ranks, because Sun was alone and there was nothing to be afraid of. George's eye opened wide, he flinched and stopped saying anything further. Sun was behind him, looking carefully and pointing the weapon with a blade at his neck. George opened his mouth in amazement, the guy thanked him for indicating his location. The subordinates immediately noticed Sun, shouting about where he was, pointing weapons in George's direction, one of them ordered to release fire. George began to stop them with a shout, raising his hand as a sign that they had stopped. No one had time to listen to him, shooting at him more than once, the bullets hit him directly. Sun ran out from George's back, while he bent back, raising his head, George's eyes were wide open, and his pupils were small, and instantly flew out of his mouth, blood. Rizzo, seeing this picture, furiously began to shoot at Sun, saying who George was. The bullets that were shot from Rizzo's pistol flew past Sun's head, he said that at any other time it would be a pity to kill someone like her. Another bullet flew past his neck, he moved away in time so as not to be hit. Another bullet flew past his face as he looked piercingly towards Rizzo. A red stripe appeared on the girl's neck, blood spurted out to the side, and she opened her mouth in silent shock. Rizzo fell to her knees, clutching her neck as more blood came out of her. Sun stood in front of her, saying that she was no comparison to his current girlfriend. Johann, observing everything that was happening, angrily shouted at him to stop, asking if he heard his words, grabbing and Jing closer and bringing the barrel of the gun to her head, threatening that if his movements only made the girl worse. A weapon instantly flew in his direction, heading along the trajectory that Sun needed. The knife hit the gun straight, knocking it out of Johann's hands, his hand trembled, he closed one eye, looking towards the gun and gritting his teeth in surprise. Sun looked dissatisfied, his eyebrows furrowed and his mouth opened slightly, answering him that he had not heard. Beads of sweat formed on Johann's face from the panic on his face, he began to scream, calling him the devil and not understanding how, in such lighting, Sun accurately knocked the gun out of his hands. Sun suddenly appeared behind him. With a sly smile he replied that he was the Lord. The man's face turned blue, and his mouth opened in panic. Johan's head, as well as his gaze, went toward Sun's voice. His face was still blue, he looked terribly scared. The guy continued to talk to him further. Sun snatched an Jing, who was in Johan's hands. He shuddered. The guy asked him the reason for the doom of the risk girl and why he took her overboard. The guy closed her eyes so that she couldn't see something terrible. The girl opened her mouth in surprise. Without hesitation, as if without making much effort, he passed the weapon over Johan, who did not have time to really say anything, but only stain everything that was possible with his blood. The guy replied that they had no chance to harm an Jing. Sun closed his eyes, sighing in relief and raising his head up, his thoughts being that the task was finally completed. Many mechanisms appeared before his eyes. A voice congratulated him on completing the task, and in order to get a new personality this week he needs to give a command. Sun began to give a command, talking about extracting a personality. There was a mechanism in the center, giving information that a new identity had been obtained. In addition to the president of the Chinyan Corporation and the best killer, he began to be able to communicate with spirits, predict, establish a connection between heaven and people, and calculate events in the human world 300 years in advance. Sun, listening to all this information, shuddered, with bewilderment on his face, asking what this mysterious reward was, saying that every time the system tries to bring more horror. The girl asked him what he was talking about. The guy still kept her eyes closed, tears were coming from her eyes. She asked if it was safe and why he closed her eyes. The guy looked at her carefully, holding her face with both hands, answering that she was no longer in danger and he wouldn't want her to see a lot of blood, and Jing worriedly asked about the people who were here. The guy smiled calmly at her, trying to calm the girl down with his appearance, telling an Jing that they were a bunch of bad people. The liner stopped near some hotel. There were quite a few police cars on the pier that were not going to be allowed onto the liner. One of the policemen, with a serious look, shouted into the loudspeaker, warning everyone to remain in place, and they arrived here on a call, receiving information that illegal gambling was being carried out on board. The people on the ship were incredibly angry and dissatisfied, asking where the police were from and who had ratted them out, and had Wilson not promised complete confidentiality. Sun came out of the plane, turning to the policeman and saying that he was the president of the Chinyan Corporation, and it was he who called the police. The girl was next to him. The police kindly thanked him while the guy showed some piece of paper. While Sun and Jing were on the pier and chatting about something with the policeman, Yan Yurua looked at them, still on the liner. The policeman invited Sun to take him to the hotel. The guy thanked him with a smile on his face, saying that if they had any questions, he would be happy to help the investigation. Yan Yurua pouted, remembering the moment when Sun knocked out Wilson, thereby saving her. She asked if he was leaving and what she should do. The guy turned his back to her, answering that he saved her because he was passing by, and since she was not afraid to get on board alone, then the girl must be responsible for her safety herself, and she herself needs to decide where to go and what do. The girl looked into the distance. She looked upset, telling herself that even when she was right in front of Sun, he still didn't look at her. Sun stood at the entrance to the room, leaning against the wall and telling an Jing that she should go to bed, and he would be in the next room, in which case she should scream at him. The girl looked somewhere, looking as if she had been torn out of her thoughts. An Jing's face showed concern. She turned in his direction, saying that she was scared and wondering if the bad people would come back for them again. The guy smiled his pleasant smile, putting his hand on his chest and saying that he gives her his word of honor and no one will dare to touch her. The girl, looking at him like this, opened her mouth slightly and noticeable embarrassment appeared on her face. An Jing turned her head a little, looking very red and saying that she was still scared, and she wouldn't be able to sleep alone. Sun looked at her, not understanding the meaning of the words. Sun turned his back to her, as if about to leave, calmly asking if she would be calm if he stood guard at her door at night. The girl shuddered from such a question. An Jing's face was still glowing red, a few drops of sweat ran down her face, and in response to his words, the girl called him a fool. The girl awkwardly, still blushing, asked him if he was waiting for her to speak directly, reminding him that tomorrow they were leaving home, saying that he had one last chance. Sun, hearing her words, did not understand what was happening. It was already getting light outside the window. The sun's rays were fully entering the room, illuminating it well. And Zijing opened her eyes slightly, looking like she had just woken up. She began to scratch her eye, closing it and touching it closer to the corners of her eye with her fingers. Sun looked at her caringly, asking if she woke up. The girl blushed when she saw him, giving him a positive answer. She held the fabric of the blanket with her hand. There was still confusion on her face. She asked with interest when he woke up. The guy looked at her carefully, saying that he woke up about 20 minutes ago and was waiting for her to wake up. The girl averted her embarrassed gaze, touching her cheek with her hand. She asked why Sun was waiting for her. A satisfied smile appeared on Sun's face. His face also turned red, answering her why he was waiting for her to wake up. And Zijing opened her eyes wide, looking at him in amazement, also looking flushed and not fully understanding his words. Sun looked at the girl enthusiastically, holding the blanket in his hands and lifting it. The girl's legs were not covered with a blanket, they were neatly placed on top of each other. Two birds were sitting on a tree, similar in color to each other. They were close to each other and seemed to be cooing among themselves. On the so-called board it was written what kind of building it was. It was a university. Trees stood next to it. The sun passed through them, flashing its rays. The car stopped near the university. A figure got out of the vehicle, heading closer to the building. And Zijing's face showed embarrassment. She dressed up beautifully and smiled kindly and said that she was going to go. The guy looked at her from the car window, smiling slightly and telling her to call him if anything happened, and he would meet her in the evening. The girl looked at him out of the corner of her eye, still embarrassed, but confidently saying that she wouldn't let him go anywhere tonight. Sun, at these words, opened his mouth wide, sweat formed on his face, and his eyes looked the size of 5 kopecks. He asked himself whether it was worth buying vitamins to restore strength. A man was sitting on the stairs. Next to him there was a sign on which something was written, and a little higher there was another man, hiding his hands in his sleeves. He said that people should not pass by. He sat on the floor, leaning his elbow on the table next to him. Yin and Yang were drawn on his sign. People passed by him, while the man said that he was telling fortunes by his face, predicting success in his personal life. The old man shuddered when a sign appeared next to him, which was placed. It said that the predictions were infallible and their accuracy was guaranteed. Sun sat down on a chair, looking like a fortune teller, specially choosing such clothes. He looked at the old man with interest, crossing his legs. The old man turned his attention to him, examining him and the sign itself, noticing the inscription and saying that now their generation does not know how to do anything, even deceive. The guy looked at him kindly, responding to his words by saying that the old man was wrong and he really had the gift of prediction. This infuriated the old man, answering that only the last fool would believe him, and they were business colleagues, because he had been warming up people here for 30 years. He turned his back to Sun, saying where the world was heading now, to which Sun felt a slight aftertaste from such words, mentally saying that words won't convince Grandpa. The guy walked along with the girl. Her face was slightly covered with blush. He asked her about going to the cinema to see a new film that everyone was praising. The girl said that she was already tired of cinema. The girl pouted slightly, her attention focused on something, causing her face to flush. Sun held some kind of coin between his fingers, luring people to him with interest, asking if they would like him to tell fortunes for the future. The girl's eyes formed into hearts. She looked at him with admiration. Her face still looked red, wondering if the guy really knew how to tell fortunes. The young man sharply grabbed her by the shoulder, pulling her towards him and saying with disapproval that Sun was a swindler and she couldn't be so naive. The girl immediately turned her attention to his hand. At his words, the corners of the guy's lips rose, creating a smile on his face. He suggested that they first tell their fortunes and see there whether he was a fraudster or not. The guy looked at him with irritation. The girl clenched her hand into a fist, and with interest, without changing her face, said that she wanted to try. She bent forward towards Sun, raising her hand and wondering if he was reading his hand. The guy's hand clenched with anger. Sun's hand began to reach out to her hand. He pointed 2 fingers, intending to tell fortunes and, answering the girl positively about fortune-telling on the hand. The young man's hand collided with the hand of the girl and Sun, stopping both of them at the same time. The guy lightly touched the inside of the palm of the guy with his fingers, who told him to tell his fortune first. He was burning with anger, looking unkindly at Sun, who did not understand the reason for this behavior. The guy said that if the prophecy did not come true, then his shop would be smashed to pieces. The guy began to stretch his palm towards Sun. The girl watched them with interest. as did the old man who was sitting not far from them. Sun looked at the guy with a calm gaze, asking him if he would blow him to pieces. The guy angrily asked him if he was scared. The girl began to stop him, telling him to stop and get out of here. He continued, saying that if he was afraid to tell his fortune, then let him collect his trash and get lost. The old man began to stroke his beard, looking towards Sun, calling him young and stupid, saying that today life would teach him a lesson. Sun agreed to the young man's words, trying to look polite. He said that if the prediction did not come true, then he would do as he saw fit. The guy laughed right in his face, mocking him and telling him that he was brave. The girl's face expressed sadness. She opened her mouth slightly, turning to the guy with the words that there was no need to measure strength. Sun put on his glasses, looking into the guy's palm, asking what he wanted to know. Having received the answer that any event that would happen to him today, the old man and the girl looked at them in surprise. Sun looked intently at his hand, answering that he saw bloodshed, which meant that the guy would be beaten today. His words made the young man laugh to the point of tears that he began to tap his knee and say that he has a black belt in Taekwondo, and he declares that he will be beaten. The young man continued to taunt him further, pointing his finger at him and declaring that he would come again tomorrow and they would get even with each other. He began to leave, telling the girl to also follow him. She turned around, covering her mouth with her hand and saying that it was better for Sun to lay low for a while and not come here again. Sun grinned at her, bringing his bent hands closer to his face, saying that he wouldn't have to wait until tomorrow and everything would happen much faster. In one of Sun's ears there was an earpiece that could apparently transmit some information to him and himself. The guy walked in front of the girl, walking much faster than her, while she walked somewhere behind him. He held her hand, irritably asking if she liked Sun, telling her to stop staring at him, and they would go to the movies. The girl pulled her hand away, looking outrageously in the direction of the guy, repeating that she didn't want to go to the cinema. The guy looked at her with displeasure, his eyebrows frowned and his teeth clenched. Turning away from the girl's side, he gave a good slam into the back of the man in front of him. The young man rubbed his forehead in irritation, asking if the man forgot his glasses at home. The man was much taller, like a rock. He glared at the young man, not hiding his displeasure. Behind him everything was on fire, which made the guy flinch. The man's eyebrows furrowed and he continued to glare with his irritated gaze. More tall men crowded around them, saying that the guy drove into their leader. This would be the end for him. The guy and girl huddled next to each other, looking scared. Sun looked at his phone with interest, passing the time, holding his head with his hand closer to his cheekbone. The old man opened one eye slightly, asking him if he had played enough, telling him to pack his things and get out. The guy was returning, his face was beaten, he was shouting for Sun. The old man turned his head in his direction, looking questioningly. The young man fell to his knees, knocking them on the ground, his hands also touching the ground. The guy's face was very badly beaten. He with tears in his eyes asked Sun for forgiveness for not recognizing his insight, asking if he could still tell his fortune. Sun smiled kindly at him, asking him if he fully admitted that he was right. The young man gave a positive answer. The old man looked in their direction with great surprise. Sun said that he has a rule where he makes no more than one fortune per person per day. He extended his hand towards the girl, saying that he could tell fortunes for her. The girl's hand ended up in Sun's hands. He began to insert with his fingers, asking what she wanted to know. The girl's face looked red. She brought her fist closer to her mouth, telling Sun to tell fortunes for financial well-being. Sun looked at her palm with a penetrating gaze, continuing to look into her hand. He held the girl's hand in his hand, continuing to insert his fingers. The guy asked to tell her full name and date of birth for a greater prediction. Wang Ying's face did not change, continuing to look at Sun, answering him when she was born and that she was a second-year pedagogical student. Sun stared at the girl, his hand going to his chin, answering with interest that Wang Ying was waiting for the good news of money. The guy looked at Wang Ying with a beaten expression. He asked her if she had bought a lottery ticket. The girl just shook her head, giving a negative answer. Many people paid attention to the girl's bag, from which some sounds were coming. Wang Ying took her phone out of her bag and beamed with happiness when she learned that her scholarship application had been approved. Still beaming with happiness, the girl ran up to Su, grabbing his arm and said that he was God. Su awkwardly said that she could read everything in her hand, while the young man stood behind them, looking at this picture. The man looked into the distance. He was asked if he would have to take care of the girl, to which he angrily said that it was just a performance. Many people crowded around Su, asking them to tell their fortunes, promising something in return. Sun looked at them in confusion. Sun put his hand on his chest and replied that he didn't want everyone to know about his gift, so he tells fortunes to 2 people a day, and today's limit has already been exhausted. Sun began to leave, holding a poster in his hands. The girls turned to him screaming, asking if they could add him on WeChat. He continued to walk somewhere, thinking that he had stirred up interest and they would do everything themselves. There were many buildings around with different floors, from small to high. The guy was in the room and warming up his body in order to sit down at the computer. He did not understand the essence of the new skill medium. Sun stared at the screen. He thanked for the instructions that were displayed to him and asked himself if everything that exists has a soul, asking if a plant also has a soul. The guy decided to check and touched the plant, expecting to see something. His eyes opened wide as he began to see the plant's memories. The girl was sitting at the table, intently doing her work on her laptop. She was holding the phone in her hands, looking at something on the smartphone with admiration. The girl, listening to the music, was doing something with the fabric with joy on her face. She looked very happy and satisfied with the food that was on her fork. The girl watered this plant, she took good care of it and even talked to it. Sun came back in surprise, removing his hand from the plant and trying to digest the information. The same girl turned to him, holding sheets of paper in her hands and asking him if Sun needed her. Sun began to leave this place. He answered her that she was not needed and told her to forget about it. The girl stared at him questioningly, not understanding the reason for this behavior. Sun went out and stood near the door, thinking that if he touched the object, he would be able to see everything that was in his field of vision. He looked somewhere into the distance, continuing to think about something, thinking about his possibilities. In his head, Sun looked devious, imagining something that was not very good. He shook his head, dismissing such thoughts and said that he shouldn't think like that, because he was a positive character. Sun turned his head, his face turned red and looked as if he was preoccupied with his thoughts, thinking that nothing would happen if he tried once. His phone vibrated in his jacket pocket, bringing him back to reality. Sun took out his phone, looking at it questioningly and going into the application where the message was. Jing wrote to him, inquiring about his plans for lunch and saying that his uncle had arrived from abroad, and his parents wanted him to have lunch with them. He stared at the phone, asking with interest if this was an official introduction to the family. There were people sitting at the table. These were members of Jing's family, and Sun himself was sitting next to her. The uncle kindly said that I don't love them yet. Jing managed to grow up and become a beauty. The girl thanked him while the woman next to him laughed. The woman smiled, covering her mouth with her hand and saying that they did not know that the girl had found such a handsome boyfriend, telling Sun not to offend her, but to take care of her. The guy smiled kindly in response, telling them not to worry, and that he would take proper care. Li Hua turned to Sun, saying that since they would soon be family members, they should exchange contacts, because he could use some guidance in business development. Sun continued to behave kindly, answering that where should he give instructions and he would help if possible, thinking what kind of little Sun he was. Li Hua held a glass of drink in his hand, wondering where Sun worked. Sun began to eat the food, saying that he only had a small business. Li Hua said that over time he would succeed and, if necessary, contacted him, saying that he was working with the Qingyun Corporation. People stared at Sun. He was not surprised by his answer and pretended to not believe it. He smiled kindly and extended his hand forward, saying that he would count on his support. Li Hua smiled happily, answering him positively. He extended his hand forward to shake Sun's hand. Sun looked at him with a penetrating gaze, including the medium in himself. Sun began to see pictures. The man was sitting and counting money. He was asked to play very believably, and he agreed to do everything beautifully. The same man was next to the girl. She was trembling and crying. Li Hua turned to him, which made him look in his direction in surprise. Her parents stood next to the girl, saying that Li Hua is a decent person and they are not afraid to entrust their daughter. She looked at him, her face turned red, and the man replied that he was a man of high morals and nothing would happen before the wedding. The doctor held papers in his hands, saying that he needed to continue taking pills, because male impotence is not easily cured. Men stood nearby, looking different and wearing different masks on their heads, asking Li Hua about something. Li Hua asked Sun what it was, bringing him back to reality while Sun stood appreciative of such information. Li Hua still had a smile on his face as he waited for Su to answer him. Sun tried to act politely and not show his reaction. His hands trembled slightly, and he replied that everything was fine. Sun covered his face with his hands, and Zijing put meat on him and asked if everything was okay. The guy replied that he had lost his appetite. He was disappointed, thinking that if he was exposed, he would face a public death and he would not care if Li Hua was considered an outsider to him. The guy began to think further to himself, thinking that he had gotten into his head and ruined one fresh fantasy. The girls were lying on the bed, wearing beautiful pajamas. The two of them had a red face. Sun, seeing this picture, was furious. Sun began to search his pockets and asked Li if he could use his phone, because he had forgotten his, and Zijing stared at him questioningly. Li Hua kindly extended his phone towards Sun, calling out the password 6 units. Sun smiled back at him, still kindly, and picked up the phone, thanking Li Hua. The guy stared at his phone with interest. The girl approached him and asked in his ear what he was up to, because his phone was in his pocket. Sun went into some application where the 4-digit password was located and entered the numbers 40 and 34. He saw a photograph where Li Hua was lying all red, and next to him were the very people whom Sun had seen in his memories. And Zijing flew away from what she saw. The guy said in amazement that he was a fan of bright entertainment. Li Hua started, asking in surprise what he meant. Sun asked everyone to look at the photo, pointing it towards the family. Looking at it, they looked shocked. They looked at Li Hua angrily, and Yu asked how long he was going to deceive her. The man wanted to ask if he was one of these. Sun threw the man's phone in his direction, because he no longer needed it. Li Hua held it in his hand, shuddering in amazement. He asked how Sun knew the password for the folder. Sun tried to pretend that he had nothing to do with it and said that he accidentally poked it a couple of times and everything turned out somehow awkward. Li Hua began to get angry from his answer. The man's hands grabbed the edge of the table in order to do something with him due to the surge of emotions. He pushed the table of food towards Sun, saying that this was all done on purpose. And Zijing and the woman next to her stared at the table that flew towards them, surprised and not knowing what to do. Sun grabbed the girl and brought her closer to him, just in time pushing the table with his foot with all his strength towards Li Hua. The table cracked in two. Li Hua held onto it and also received a blow, right in the stomach. The impact sent him flying straight into the wall, and blood began to flow from his mouth. He fell to his knees and cowered, clutching his stomach and spitting out blood. Sun looked at him displeasedly, saying that he staged the attack to make himself look like a hero, counting on the inheritance of the Yu family. Su asked when he was going to confess to impotence. Li Hua, hearing all this, asked him what he said with a shocked expression. And Yu stood next to a woman who pitied her. The man looked at him angrily and asked what else he was hiding from them. Li Hua was looking for something in his jacket, trembling and without changing his face, and asked who he even was. Sun looked unkindly as he introduced himself and said that the man could call him by his new title, demigod Su and seer. The house was beautiful and tall, showing that it was very spacious inside. Li Hua ran away from Yu while holding a knife and looking angry. She said that the man would never appear in front of her eyes again. She was not afraid and threw the knife towards Li Hua. The man managed to jump behind the wall, and the knife flew into the wall, making a characteristic sound. Yu hid her eyes behind her fists. She began to tremble, and tears flowed down her face. She continued to cry, and Zijing came up to her and said with pity in her eyes that she was lucky to know his true face before it was too late. Su smiled kindly at the man, apologizing for this scandal. The man replied that he was only doing them a favor. The man asked how he found out everything about him when Li Hua returned from abroad. The woman also did not understand, reminding him of the password. Sun, hearing such amazement, was pleased with himself and said that he was just a seer while a piece of paper flew behind him. A ball of paper hit him in the back of the head. He tilted his head and began to touch the place where the paper hit. And Yu wiped away her tears while Zijing looked at him disapprovingly. She looked at him displeasedly, telling him to stop fooling around and sit down to eat. The guy was walking somewhere, looking to the side with some confusion. He stopped near the turn and said to stop hiding, because he knew that they were following him. And Yu stood around the corner, clenching her fist and opening her mouth slightly when she heard the man coming out. She came out. Sun never expected to see Yu. His eyes opened wide and his pupils shrank. He asked what she was doing here. The girl looked straight at him, wondering if he really was a seer and could help drive out evil. Sun was surprised by such questions. His eyes were still wide open, and he asked again about evil. It was already dark outside. There was a car parked next to the house, and there was a stone path along the road to the house. And Yu began to explain that after returning from abroad they lived here. Sun looked with interest and said that the place was excellent and it was very beautiful here. He turned his gaze to her, asking if she could tell everything in detail. It was unpleasant for the girl to remember all this. She started with the fact that about 10 days ago, on the second night of her stay, and Yu was lying in bed, sleeping peacefully, when she heard some sounds outside. She turned over to the other side, opening one eye slightly to see something. She thought the noise was crying. The wind passed into her room, blowing the curtains wildly. She stood up, stepping onto the floor with her bare feet. And Yu went to the window. The wind blew her pajamas, and she said that she attributed everything to the wind blowing. Holding the curtains, the girl looked out the window and rubbed her eye. And Yu shuddered when she saw someone's silhouette inside the curtains. The girl was frightened, her eyes opened wide, and beads of sweat appeared on her face. And Yu grabbed her head, remembering all this. She continued that after a second the curtains returned to their place, but she was sure that there was someone there. The guy looked at her with some confusion, his eyebrow frowned slightly. They began to walk towards the house. Sun asked to take him to her room to look around. The girl agreed and followed him. And Yu stood behind. Entering the room she showed the place where it all happened. Sun went to the window, holding on to the fabric of the curtain and began to look out the window. He continued to hold the cloth, closing his eyes and concentrating on himself, turning on the medium. Little by little, bright, small red rays began to gather around. These rays were near the spirit of the girl who was emerging from the trees. Sun opened his eyes in amazement, not believing what he was seeing now. Sun left the building, being in the place where he saw the spirit of the girl. The wind was strong. Sun turned his head in the right direction, looking carefully. There was a car not far from the path. Someone spoke to Yu and asked why she returned to this house. The lights were on in the car, indicating that someone was there. And Yu talked to her mother, looking through the car window, answering that she was confident in Su. Sun stood and thought that suddenly the ghost would take him with him. There was a rope with garlic on his wrist. The guy grinned at himself, asking if he couldn't outplay the spirit, since he was a seer. The guy was scared, turning his head straight. Beads of sweat began to run down his face. There was a spirit standing almost next to him. His silhouette was hard to see. He looked in numbness, his eyes opened wide, and Sun noticed that the cold was penetrating to the bones. The girl stood behind the guy. He was holding a rope with garlic in his hands. Sun turned towards the spirit, looking in her direction with disapproval and noticing the location. He began to run towards the spirit, holding a seal and a cross in his hands, saying that the spirit would now receive it. The girl closed one eye, looking in the other direction, and was holding something in both of her hands. Sun was dumbfounded when he saw in front of him the girl he was now flying towards. He flew past the girl, she turned in his direction, and Sun continued to study her with interest. Sun plopped his face on the floor. The girl turned in his direction and, without changing her face, looked at him. He stood up, noting with displeasure that she was intangible, which made the situation sticky. The girl bent down to him, asking in surprise if he could see her. The guy looked at her in confusion. She asked if he could hear her. Sun asked if she could move into his body to be resurrected. The guy stood up. The girl grabbed his arm and exclaimed how great it was. Sun turned and asked if he could touch her now. And Yu, looking at how Sun stood, came to the conclusion that evil spirits were having fun with him. The girl stepped on the gas and reached for the gearbox, pulling it forward and saying that she would try to find her cousin a new guy. The spirit blossomed next to him, still holding his hand. Sun, seeing the car driving away, thought that as soon as something went wrong, and Yu immediately took off. Sun grabbed the girl by the back of her clothing, saying that it was time for them to talk. He still held her like that, asking her what her name was and why she scared people. The girl turned away, saying how much she missed being touched. Sun looked at her, answering that until she answered normally, he would not let her go. Qin Zhu said that she died after falling from a cliff, and since she was neither seen nor heard, she decided to stay here, because she had nowhere to go and did not want to scare anyone. Sun looked at her in confusion. Without answering, the girl asked if he could let her go, because she told the truth. He let her go, the girl's feet landing on the cold grass. Sun asked her if she wanted to go with him. The girl shuddered at such a question. She looked at him in surprise and asked if he really wanted to take her with him. The guy turned his back to her, answering that she had nothing to do here and let her live with him. The girl blushed and replied that she would not go anywhere with him and that she lived here as she wanted, she was not like a pet. Sun continued to stand with his back to her, saying that he wanted to help her take revenge. He looked at her with pity, wondering if she was okay with the other girl continuing to live a carefree life. Tears started running down the ghost's face, her eyes opened wide. Sun said that he spoke for the girl who pushed her off the cliff. It was night outside, the house was 3 stories high and looked beautifully decorated. The guy closed the curtains while the spirit sat on the bed and looked at him. Sun turned to her and said that she would live here and there was no need to fly at night and scare people. The girl looked at him in surprise, her face was covered with a blush, and she asked if she could go to bed right here. Sun gave a positive answer and said that she should rest, and tomorrow morning they will go to take revenge. The girl, without changing her face, looked in his direction and agreed with him. She looked off into the distance, saying nothing more. The girl was sitting on a large bed by herself, being in an empty room. Sun lay and slept, he had various dreams, and drool silently flowed from his mouth. The guy opened one eye, looking down with interest. Seeing the sleeping ghost on his body, the guy opened his mouth wide in shock and stared at her. The girl rubbed her eye, she said that he woke her up. Sun stared at her and screamed, asking what she was doing in his room. The ghost's face was red, she sat on her knees and said that because of the new place she was afraid to sleep alone. Sun looked at her in amazement, asking again and thinking what kind of nonsense is this if she is a ghost and has nothing to be afraid of. She lay on him, saying that since he brought her here, then he should be responsible for her comfort. The ghost lay on top of him, closing her eyes and trying to sleep, drool coming out of her mouth. Sun opened his arms wide, looking into the distance in surprise and mentally asking himself why he did this. The black car was driving somewhere, and there was a ghost and Sun in the car. The guy looked intently at the road, asking the girl if she remembered the way to her house. The girl looked carefully out the window, saying that at the next intersection you need to turn left. Sun directed his gaze in her direction, saying that they were best friends and she killed her purely because of the guy. Tears appeared on the girl's face, she lowered her gaze and said that she trusted her and could not think that her friend was capable of such a thing. Sun asked why she didn't go to her and why she had to live near the place of her death. The spirit replied that there was a strong amulet in her house that would not let her near her. Sun looked curiously, saying that this was an interesting detail. They drove up to a friend's house, the spirit was flying next to him while the guy called the house. Sun continued to press and look at the intercom. The girl asked how they would take revenge. Sun said that she would soon see everything for herself and, if something happened, she would help as soon as necessary. The woman opened the gate, displeasedly asking who Sun had come to see. He walked past her and with a small smile said that he was going to her husband. The woman displeasedly asked where he was and who invited him to enter. The woman extended her hand and rushed towards Sun, who was walking further, ordering him to stop. The man left the house and, looking into the distance, asked what was happening. Sun sat down at the table, the woman grabbed him displeasedly and said that the guy claims to know him and he came in without an invitation. The man came down and held some object under his armpit. The man angrily shouted at him to get out otherwise he would call the police. Sun calmly asked if they would offer him water, extending his hand forward. The man was in silent shock when he saw the water bottle begin to fly towards Sun. The chair he was holding under his arm fell with a crash to the floor. The ghost was next to him, placing a bottle of water in his hands. Sun looked with interest at their reaction. The man opened his mouth wide, standing in a daze at what he saw. The woman was also shocked, opening her mouth wide and looking at Sun. This was exactly the reaction he expected from them. Sun looked away, saying that they needed to talk and taking a sip from his bottle of water. The man opened his mouth wide, looking at him in surprise. Beads of sweat appeared on the man's face. He asked for forgiveness for their behavior and asked if their family was in danger of trouble. Sun looked serious, answering that while passing by he noticed a blood mark and usually this means that within 3 days the family will lose their home and relatives. The woman and the man expressed the same emotions. They were shocked and asked if they would be ruined or if someone would die. The man fell to his knees, hitting them on the cold floor. The woman also fell to her knees, placing them together in front of her. They knelt before Sun, begging for their help, saying that they would build an altar and it would be honored by their grandchildren and their grandchildren's grandchildren. Sun calmly asked if there were other people in the house. The man bent down as if he was bowing and replied that his daughter was in the house. Sun looked at him seriously, telling him to call her. The man turned and immediately called his daughter's name, ordering her to come down immediately. Sun looked relaxed, crossing his arms over his chest and waiting for Jiao. Jiao came down the stairs, wondering why she was shouting like that. Having descended, she looked at her parents, who were kneeling. Jiao looked at them, asking the reason for them kneeling. The man looked serious as he ordered her to come over. The girl approached, saying something, until the ghost, at the sight of her, shuddered. She remembered how she stood on the edge and Jiao pushed her in the back. She flew down. Qin Zhu was unhappy, clutching something in her hands that caused a vein to appear. She furiously walked towards her and extended her hand, telling her to give her life back. Sun looked at Qin Zhu in confusion as she walked towards the girl. The girl said something. Qin Zhu's hands stopped a couple of centimeters. She stopped talking and stared somewhere, looking questioningly. On the girl's chest hung an amulet that looked like a small light. Sun stared at the girl, mentally asking himself if this was a protective amulet. It was as if there was a barrier around Jiao. The ghost could not approach her because of the amulet. The girl seemed to be torn to pieces, tears appeared in the corners of her eyes, she crossed her arms over her chest, covering herself. Sun was shocked by her appearance, and a fountain of blood rushed out of his nose. Her parents looked at him in surprise, asking what happened to Sun. The guy looked at them with a serious look and pinched his nose, from which blood was gushing. Qin Zhu's face did not change, she was still in tears. She said that she had completely forgotten about the amulet that Jiao wears. Sun looked at the girl, frowning slightly and continuing to hold his hand near his nose. He asked her to stop. The girl turned to him and with tears in her eyes agreed with him. The parents stared at Sun in confusion, wondering if the guy had started talking to an evil spirit and noting that the spirit was strong for being able to injure Sun. Jiao continued to look at them all, asking what was going on here. The man grabbed his daughter's hand, telling her to stand with them. Sun calmed himself down and coughed, saying that he tried to push the evil spirit to the wall, but he would not give up so easily, and most likely he would not be able to get rid of the bloody mark, and they would have to answer for what they had done. The man said that his whole family was counting on him, asking him to come up with something. Sun pointed to the girl, saying that her mark had summoned an evil spirit, wondering what she had done that the spirit of the deceased could not calm down and wanted revenge. Jiao was shocked by this news, staring at Sun warily. The father who heard his words also looked with his mouth wide open and afraid for his daughter. The woman could not believe his words, looking at him in amazement. Jiao stared to the side, fearing something. Her pupils shrank, and in her thoughts, she thought about Qin Zhu. The girl was trembling with fear. She was in a panic and said that it was definitely Qin Zhu and she had come to take revenge. The woman, shouting, told her that she was talking, because the girl had died long ago. Xin seriously asked who Qin Zhu was, mentally noting that the two of them had known about this for a long time. The man, in confusion, said that his daughter had done an unworthy thing, accidentally pushing her friend off a cliff. Qin Zhu shouted back as if she were being careful, while Sun pretended not to know anything and asked for more details. The man began to say that the reason for their discord was the guy who loved Qin Zhu. While climbing the mountain, their daughter pushed her in a fit of anger. The girl angrily said that this was all wrong and the guy liked her. Her mother replied that so many years had passed, and she still did not admit her mistake and because of this they had problems. The girl angrily replied that the guy himself believed that he was unworthy of her. The man, unable to control himself, hit his daughter in the face, forcing her to shut up. Her father annoyedly said that now was not the time for this and because of her the family was in danger. Sun intervened in their conversation, drawing attention to himself and saying that her father was right and they needed to return to the common problem. Qin Zhu looked into the distance, saying that the girl killed her out of jealousy. The father leaned towards him, answering that the dead could no longer be helped, and the living needed to be saved, asking if he would protect them from Qin Zhu. Sun began to think, saying that since she died 3 years ago, it is unlikely that she would not have come here during this time, but she did not harm anyone, asking if it was all about the amulet. Jiao handed the amulet into Sun's hand. The father said that he got it for his daughter and most likely he helped them. Sun began to examine the amulet in his hands, asking where they got it. The man politely said that a monk had given an amulet from the Taoist monastery of Qinyang, Yunling City. The amulet shone. Sun thought that since the thing works, then there are other people who understand otherworldly things, taking the amulet for themselves. Sun said that the amulet is effective, but over the years it has lost spiritual energy. He will help for free. but he will take the amulet for himself to study. The man agreed and asked to help them. Sun said that in 3 years, Jin Zhu's soul has turned into an evil spirit. He has something to offer, but they won't like it. Concern was visible on the man's face. He asked what it was. Sun seriously stated that Jiao should surrender to the authorities, and then Qin Zhu would calm down and he could easily get rid of her. All family members were shocked. The girl asked him again. Sun replied that he understood how difficult this decision was. The man restlessly asked if there was another way, and if something happened he would increase the fee to 7 figures. He looked at them displeased, asking if they didn't believe him. Sun, after such words, began to get up from the sofa he was on. The guy began to leave, telling them to solve the problem themselves. His father stopped him and asked him not to leave them. The man held on to Sun tightly, telling his daughter that she would have to give up. Jiao was unhappy, shouting that she would never go to prison, asking whether Sun was capable of anything and whether he was any good. The man told her to shut up, because she was setting up the whole family. The girl angrily said that she would not give up. Her mother cried, touching her shoulder and telling her to think about her younger brother. The girl pushed her in the chest, pushing her away and responding negatively. Jiao began to run away from the room. The man looked at her actions in shock. He grabbed her tightly, saying that she would not go anywhere and the fate of the family depended on her. Jiao declared that he should let her go. Sun sipped his tea, commenting on how touching it was. While they called the police, Qin Zhu stared at them in amazement. 2 police cars arrived near Jiao's house, and those inside asked who called them. The police looked around while the father said that it was they who called them, and 3 years ago their daughter killed a girl named Qin Zhu by pushing her off a cliff. The woman told her not to blame them, because she would ensure their safety by sacrificing herself. The girl clenched her teeth in anger. Her look was angry. She didn't think that her parents would do this to her. Jiao angrily shouted that her parents covered for her for 3 years, and this was also a crime. Her mother stared at her in numbness. The man angrily shouted that they knew nothing about her shameful act. Without changing her face, the girl said that since they hoped to get rid of her, she would drag them all down with her. The policemen stared at them, one of them asking the other if they had had too much to drink, the second only asking if they were telling each other off. Sun approached them, saying that this is true and the parents helped their daughter escape from justice, and now they have contradictions, which is why they are shifting the blame onto each other. Sun said that he had evidence as he put the voice recorder in the policeman's hands. The man turned to Sun, saying that he was not a savior, but a saboteur, wondering who he even was. Sun turned to them, introducing himself calmly. Qin Zhu stood nearby. There was anger on her face. The guy said that he was helping the spirit take revenge. All the family members stared at him in shock. Jiao called him a demon. The police dragged them into the car. The father asked not to take his soul. The girl spoke for Qin Zhu. The policeman only said that the irremovability trick would not work. The policeman thanked him for the evidence and assistance to the investigation. Sun kindly said that this is the duty of any decent citizen. The police car drove away. Sun watched them drive away. The corners of his lips turned up and his mouth opened, saying that the job was done and asking Jean how she was feeling. She replied that she no longer had any anger left, but she was upset. Sun turned to her slightly with interest, asking why she was upset. Qin Zhu brought her hands to her eyes as if crying, saying that she seemed to have lost her goal and had nothing left. The girl opened her mouth slightly when they began to pull her cheek. Tears appeared at the corners of her eyes. Sun said that her main goal was to help him. Sun looked at her seriously, saying that he had done a great favor and owed her a favor, asking if she would be his pet. The girl rubbed the place where she was held by the cheek. There were still droplets of tears in her eyes. She agreed to Sun's condition. Jean said that she would fulfill all his wishes and would not wear too much. The guy was in shock, and blood almost came out of his mouth. He grabbed her hand, saying how he would concentrate on work if she was like this. The girl's eyes looked like she would cry again. Jean asked if he rejected her from the very beginning. Sun smiled at her, saying that this is not what he meant. In his thoughts it seemed to him that he had found another headache. A ringtone sounded in Sun's jacket pocket. Someone was calling his phone. While the girl was crying, Sun busily asked Li Hu what happened. He was told that one journalist was slandering, saying that all his actions during the transition were a skit. He asked whether they should discourage him from exposing him. Sun was curious. He said that they should not do anything, and he would come up soon. He stared confidently at Qin Zhu, telling her to follow him, because they had the same business. In the square, one man shouts that he does not believe in providence and today he will expose the charlatan. Hearing this, people gradually begin to gather around the man. The man introduces himself to the camera as an investigative journalist. His goal today is to expose the fraudster. The male viewers of the channel are beginning to be indignant that they have been waiting for a long time for the seer. One of the man's fans supports the journalist, for which he thanks him. A guy among the crowd notices a strange man in monastic clothes walking towards them. Dressed so as not to be recognized, Su Xiong slowly approaches the crowd of onlookers. His eyes were covered with dark glasses, and in his hands he held a stick with a white flag. Most people could not understand why the seer was so young. Some began to suspect that he was really a charlatan and was thus trying to make money from them. Stopping at the square, Su sits down on a chair in front of the crowd. With a kind smile, he asks people which of them came for predictions. The man with the camera confidently volunteers to be the first to make a prediction. Su Sun offers the man several options on how he can tell fortunes for the man. The man, grinning, points the camera at the seer. He was not interested in the future. He asks to tell Su about the past. Su Sun looks at the man in surprise, because it is much easier for him to guess using the past. The journalist, mockingly, declares that already at the very beginning the fraudster panicked and was not ready to predict the past for him. The man repeats that he wants to know the prediction specifically about the past. Su, considering that since this is the man's desire, he does not dare to contradict, takes the man's hand and, concentrating, runs 2 fingers across his palm. Several frames from the life of a journalist flash through his head. In the first frame, he sees the man's mother holding him by the ear because the boy wet his pants. In the second shot, he watches a journalist trying to cheat on a serious exam. And in the third frame, the girl turns away from the man, not wanting to continue the relationship with him. Su, having looked through the man's entire past, is slightly embarrassed, not wanting to reveal such details from the man's life. The journalist, pointing his finger at the seer, asks him to omit the dramatic pause and still tell him what he saw in his past. Su, smiling, calls him by name, telling him a small part of the information that he learned about the man. The journalist's face changes a little, believing that the seer knew that he would come today and prepared all the information about him in advance. Su Sun, surprised by such impudence, hints that he can tell more about him. The journalist laughed loudly at what he heard. He calls the seer a coward and that he does not know him at all. People who watch this begin to ask him to tell them what he learned. Smirking, Su slowly and with all the details tells the shameful stories of the man. The man could not understand where the scammer could find out all this information about him. The seer also adds that he saw obscene material on the man's computer. Su looks questioningly at the journalist, asking whether he has enough sensation for his live broadcast. The man slowly backs away, wondering if he is human or demon, because this information is impossible to find. Laughing, Su calls himself a human, adding that demons would not walk around in crowded places during the day. People cannot believe that a person can find out such a thing. The man turns to the public and realizes that the seer knows everything about everyone. Su also decides to tell the man about his horoscope for today. He warned him that he should often look at his feet, because he accused a decent person of charlatanism. The man is trying to convince himself that all this cannot be true. The girl's spirit flies up to the journalist from behind and trips him. The man stumbles as he steps back. The man falls face down on the ground, causing the entire audience to be surprised that the prediction came true. After seeing this, the spectators quickly surround the seer so that Su can tell their fortunes. Smiling, Su asks everyone to line up and come up one by one. In her room, a girl lies among soft toys, and a servant stands next to her. The maid asks the girl to eat a little because she needs it. The girl doesn't want to listen and continues to watch the news on her phone. In her phone she finds news about an unknown seer who can accurately predict the future or past. The girl looks at the seer in surprise, wanting to try to meet him. Resting in the office, Su Sun, lounging on a chair, makes a languid sound of fatigue. The security guards standing at the entrance to the president's office are trying to hear what is happening in the boss's office. The security guard with a scar on his face does not understand what is happening in Su's office. The second guard suggests that this is their boss's way of trying to relax and doesn't think he needs their help. The guards begin to argue about why such sounds are coming from the office. The security guard with the scar, a little touched, adds that their boss works hard for the company. At this time, Su, closing his eyes, continues to make a strange sound while enjoying himself. Standing over Su, the girl's spirit asks whether he is pleased with what she is doing. The girl massaged Su's head. The ghost at the same time decides to ask the question why Su Sun is making predictions. She did not understand why he was trying so hard and wasting a lot of time. Su agrees with the girl, adding that this is why he makes only 3 predictions a day. Thinking over recent events, Su is puzzled why the system did not count the completion of the task because he received that very fame. There was a knock on the door. Su immediately responded by allowing him to enter his office. Secretary Su enters the room, confused, and says that he may have serious problems. Not understanding what happened, Su asks again what could have happened. The girl hands the tablet to President Su. On it was written the news that Master Zhou himself took up the task of exposing the seer Su. Taking the tablet into his hands, Su calls him a peculiar person. Su had heard a lot about him, calling him a neo-Daoist metaphysician. The girl emphasizes that this man is a respected person among rich people. The girl, worried about Su's reputation, tells him that if he takes on this matter, it could end badly for him. Su, having thought it over, declares that if he is the best of his kind, then he is obliged to meet him. The girl is surprised that the president is going to meet with Master Zhou. The guy believes that this could serve as good advertising for him, because his name will be discussed even more often and it would be stupid to refuse such a chance. Taking the tablet, the girl asks President Su to better disguise himself for the meeting with the master. No one should know his identity. Su, waving his hand, explains that he has everything under control and knows what to do. The girl calms down from what she hears. Heading to the exit, the girl once again reminds the president to be careful at meetings. The spirit that has been in the room all this time decides to call its owner. Su turns his attention to her. Lifting up the secretary's skirt, the spirit asks to look at it. Seeing this, the guy's nose began to bleed. The secretary quickly covers up and looks at President Su questioningly. The spirit of the girl laughs and asks if he liked it. Su, having wiped away the blood, begins to wave his hands, saying that it is not his fault. There are guards standing outside the door, hearing screams in the boss's office. They could not decide whether President Su needed help. The shot changes to show Su standing among the crowd, waiting for Master Zhou. All the people are discussing the sudden visit of the master himself. The spirit, worried, decides to ask if the owner is angry with her because she wanted to please the owner. Su asks her to shut up. Seeing Master Zhou approaching, the crowd loudly greets him. The master gets out of the car, accompanied by several guards, covering his mouth with a handkerchief. Zhou proudly considers the slums, saying that he understands why people could believe the charlatan. With a confident gait, accompanied by several guards, Master Zhou heads to the square, where that same seer Su is located. The grinning man calls the seer Su a youth, emphasizing that today they will decide who has the right to call themselves a master. The spirit of the girl flies up from behind to the master. The entire crowd continues to greet the well-known Master Zhou. After pushing him a little, the man falls sharply down. The security, not having time to react, silently watch as their boss falls. The man falls face down on the floor. Su asks with a smile why he doesn't watch his step. The accompanying guards help Master Zhou get up, checking to see if everything is okay with him. Su adds that before leaving, the master should have told his fortune first. An angry man with a flame in his eyes declares that he is rejoicing early, because he came to expose the charlatan to everyone. Su Sun, continuing to smile kindly at the master, asks what he is going to expose. Master Zhou calls the seer Su a fraudster, emphasizing that he takes advantage of people's gullibility to enrich himself. Seer Su clarifies exactly how Master Zhou plans to expose him. Master Zhou offers to tell each other's fortunes and find out which of them can predict more accurately. Su points his finger at the master, asking him to choose what to tell his fortune on. With a grin, Master Zhou calls him cool, turning up his sleeve. The man shows the scar, asking where he got it from. People watching this were very surprised, because it is almost impossible to recognize. The man feels superior to Seer Su. Sitting down on Master Zhou's knee, Su asks to extend his hand. The man, grinning, thinks that he holds himself well, but he still considers him a fraud. Seer Su silently strokes Zhou's palm several times. The man, not believing in the powers of the seer, invites him to surrender and bow to him 3 times, after which he leaves in disgrace. But a minute later, an answer to Master Zhou's question comes from Su. He said that he received the scar due to negligence in childhood. This answer puts the man into a stupor. He did not understand how this was possible. People watching everything see the surprised man's face. They assume that Seer Su told the truth. Master Zhou, still unable to believe it, lowers his head trying to understand how he could do this. But the man decides to lie, saying that it's all a lie and that he cut his hand 3 years ago with a knife, poking him with his finger. He calls him a charlatan. Su's face changes to a gloomy one. He was outraged by the man's lies, saying that this joke would not go away so easily. Master Zhou is a little lost in words, now offering to tell fortunes to the Seer Su. Getting nervous, the master senses a strange killing energy around Su, calling him a killer. Smiling, Su asks Master Zhou to at least tell him when he will get married. The man warns that he is an expert in this and that the seer was wrong to choose this particular topic for him. Su extends his hand to the master. Taking the seer's hand, the master pretends to look into the future. Abruptly releasing the seer's hand, Master Zhou's face changes to a frightened one. The man gradually moves back from Su. Master Zhou, still amazed, decides to clarify the date of birth of the Seer Su. Su does not understand what exactly could have struck the master, telling him his date of birth. Having heard this, the master still cannot understand how this is possible. Master Zhou bows to the seer, apologizing for his insolence. He adds that he did not immediately see his greatness and asks not to hold a grudge against him. Seer Su was very puzzled because Zhou planned to expose him, and as a result he also apologized. Su, still amazed by what he heard, expected that the experienced master was planning to tell him something really worthwhile. The master's face was frightened. He decides to admit defeat. The public was even more confused, because Master Zhou himself admitted his worthlessness. With a smile, Su still asks to tell people what exactly the master saw, because this is the only way they can close this issue. Master Zhou, sweating, asks if he is obliged to say this out loud. Su, angrily hanging over the man, still reads to tell everything he knows. The master is confused. The man falls to his knees in fear and begins to bow, because he could not reveal the seer's secret, adding that he will never give predictions again. The audience follows the former Master Zhou with their gaze. A guy from the crowd asks where the master is going, so Zhou sends him away and asks him not to call him master anymore. People silently look at the seer, waiting for him to be able to explain this strange behavior of the former Master Zhou. Seer Su calls this a simple misunderstanding, and although he is a fortune teller, he is not a demigod and cannot perform miracles. People attack Su and call him the new master, asking him to predict the future for them. A girl from the crowd shouts for Su to marry her. Su, realizing that for him this is the ceiling of popularity, invites the spirit to end this. The girl's spirit calls him incredible, specifying how he was able to pull this off. The guy hints with a smile that this is nothing for a killer of his level. An unknown person calls Master Su. Frightened, the guy says it's not him. Turning around, a cute girl stands in front of Su. He had previously met her. The girl wonders if he can accurately make a prediction. Pretending that he doesn't know the girl, Su clarifies what exactly the girl wants to know. In his thoughts, he did not understand how the girl could find him here. The girl, a little embarrassed, asks to find someone close to her. Su, I was wary. Su, smiling, asks the girl to name the date of birth of the person she is interested in. In his thoughts he understood who the girl was looking for. The girl, blushing deeply, says that she doesn't know this, adding that she has this guy's porter. The girl shows a photo of Su Xiong's face, which makes him convinced of his guesses. The girl asks if he can still find this person. The spirit adds that Su has quite a lot of fans. Su says I give up and decides to take off his hat and glasses, showing his appearance. Su asks how she was able to find him. The girl says that she found his video on social networks and then immediately recognized him. Su Sun thinks that even though he is a demigod, he is still far from female intuition. The girl, embarrassed, covers her mouth. She wonders why Su decided to work as a fortune teller. Seer Su calls this a hobby, asking why the girl was looking for him. The girl says that there is nothing special about this. She wanted to thank her for saving her on that liner. Su was happy to help her, adding that maybe she still needed his help. The girl decides to say that she still has one more question. Su looks at her questioningly. Approaching shyly, the girl asks if Su has a girlfriend. Su Sun hands his business card to the girl. He explains that he already has a girlfriend, adding that she can call him if she needs help. The girl, a little disappointed, takes the business card from Su's hands, adding that it was already clear to her that such a prominent guy would have a girlfriend. Embarrassed, Sue justifies that he is not at all what she imagines him to be. The spirit standing behind him is indignant that he is becoming very poor. The girl decides to find out whether he is engaged or just dating. Sue doesn't understand why this is so important to the girl. The girl, inspired, squeezes the business card in her hands with the words that she still has a chance to compete for the guy. As she leaves, the girl says goodbye to Sue, saying that she won't give up so easily and will try. Sue Xiong was not very happy with this statement. The ghost starts pointing his finger at Sue out of jealousy, saying that he is now involved with another girl. Sue assures that this is not worth paying attention to. The guy was perplexed why the system, after Master Zhou, never counted the task. Walking down the street, Sue assumes that his real target is much larger than the average master. The girl's spirit obediently follows him. The shot changes to a confused guy trying to offer the master some tea. The master with a rather gloomy face decides to ask why the guy invited him to drink tea, considering tea just an excuse for a meeting. The guy falls to his knees, lowering his head. He begins to beg the master to help and restore justice, adding that his entire family was imprisoned because of Su Sun. The master asks if he is sure that Su Sun is connected with the ghost and how he knows this. The guy immediately states that his parents told and that they even know who the ghost is. It was the recently deceased girl Qin Zhu. The master comes to the conclusion that Su can interact with the spirits of the dead. The guy adds that after that, Su became too lucky, but he never heard of him being interested in the occult. The monk believes that Su really could not have known about the incident 3 years ago, concluding that it was the spirit who told him about his death. The master remembers that he heard about the seer Master Su, asking what the guy knows about him. The guy says that he only saw a video of him and nothing more. The monk begins to suspect that Su Sun and Master Su are the same person. The guy is surprised by this statement. The monk believes that if a ghost bothers people, then it must be destroyed. He also adds that since Su serves the spirit, then he himself becomes a bad person. The master, heading towards the exit, asks to be taken to Su. There is a lonely canopy on the shore. A man sitting under it is fishing. His girlfriend is sitting on Su's lap. She is indignant that Su doesn't know how to fish at all. The girl doesn't understand why they sit on the shore of the lake and waste time on this. Su smiles and assures the girl that fishing requires time and patience. Su notices how someone came to them calling them a fish. In the background there is a master with a guy. The guy is trying to understand how the master knew exactly where Su was. The girl is surprised to meet Wang Teng. The guy angrily shouts that Su stole his girl and he will pay for it. Su realizes that the monk has the technique of recognizing spirits. The monk looks calmly towards the couple. The girl's spirit is also surprised that the monk can see her. Su decides to ask the guy Wang Jiao if he is his sister. Taking off his glasses, Su suspects that it is because of this guy that he is not getting credit for completing the task, adding that the shooting gallery world is a small place. Wang, mocking Su, calls him a pseudo-god, adding that he brought a real monk from a Taoist monastery. The spirit tells her suspicions about the monk. Assuming that he sees her, Su realizes that this is no ordinary monk. Taking the amulet out of his pocket, Su hands it to the monk. He assumes that this amulet was made by the monk. The girl's spirit, panicking, asks to immediately remove the amulet. Putting his fingers into a seal and preparing to expel the spirits, the monk says that this is an old amulet and it is of no value to him. Having activated the seal, strange waves began to flow from the monk's side, and the spirit suddenly began to be attracted to the monk. Frightened, the girl asks for help. At the last moment, Su manages to catch the spirit by the hand and pull him towards him. Girl Su, covering her mouth, looks in surprise at the incomprehensible shadow fight. The angry monk says that he will teach the guy a lesson for collaborating with evil spirits, adding that he does not care what sect he is from. Su pretends that he does not understand the monk, adding that he does not know any spirits and if the monk continues to disturb him, then he may get into trouble. The monk makes another seal calling Su, a street magician, adding that he will not tolerate such threats. At this moment, an unknown person puts a pistol to the monk's back with words out of nowhere. The monk looks in shock at the people in black clothes. This was President Su's bodyguard. Crouching next to the girl, Su addresses the monk, hinting that times have already changed and his techniques will not be able to withstand his bullets. The monk indignantly calls the guy a sucker, adding that he does not adhere to combat ethics. A guard puts a gun to the monk's head and warns him to choose his words towards his boss. The monk, covering his head with his hands, fearfully asks not to touch him, because he is just an old man. The guy turns to the monk, not understanding why the great Taoist monk stopped because of some simple bullets. The monk, holding the guy's collar, shouts at him, saying that he is not immortal and, of course, is afraid of bullets. Su was not happy about meeting Wang Teng. He adds that he will correct the balance of grievances and complaints. The guy, falling to his knees with tears in his eyes, begins to ask for mercy, because you shouldn't get your hands dirty about something like him. Su decides to ask his girlfriend's opinion, to which she replies that she would not like to see the guy again. Su asks the guards to take Wang to the police station and testify that he knew about Qin Zhu's murder. The guard hearing this takes the guy by the collar. Taking the guy away, he continues to ask for forgiveness from President Su with all his might. The monk looks away from understanding what is happening. Su decides to explain to the monk that he is a law-abiding citizen and he did not plan to kill anyone. With the words that he should consult him, Su points his finger near his feet. Having sat down at his feet, the monk immediately voices his assumptions that this is the same Master Su, adding that he does not deserve such attention from a demigod. Su, smiling at him, adds that before he did not know at all about the existence of spirits, but the experience of the last 2 weeks told him a lot. The monk is surprised by what he heard. He had never seen before that a person could acquire such complex knowledge in just 2 weeks. Su, with a rather serious face, asks to tell him about the world to which the immortal cultivators belong, because he suspects that they exist. The monk is surprised that Su knows about immortal cultivators, not understanding why he needs this at all. Su emphasizes that he himself knows very little about this topic, but he is very interested in it. The monk, wiping sweat from his face, suggests that Su simply read a lot of short stories, but it has little to do with fiction. After all, even if he were truly an immortal cultivator, he would not be afraid of the pathetic pistol. The monk adds that his knowledge can do little to harm people. The maximum that he can do is make forecasts, fight evil and simply entertain a crowd of onlookers. Su decides to clarify why the monk wanted to grab the girl's spirit so much. The monk, pointing at the spirit, says that he decided to take the spirit out of curiosity for study. It seemed strange to him how the girl's spirit looked. According to his information, they should look like a clot of energy, but this looked absolutely like a living person, which interested him. Su, looking at the girl's spirit, adds that he also found it strange. The spirit, shedding tears, asks Su not to give her to this Taoist for experiments, because he will cut her into pieces and conduct experiments. Su assures that he did not plan to give her to this monk for experiments. The girl hugs his legs and calls Su her master. At this moment, the Su girl was behind her with a rather scary grimace. She decides to clarify what kind of relationship he has with this spirit. Su coughs nervously, trying not to turn around. The girl puts her hands on Su's shoulders. He stammers a little and says that he understood everything and he has no more questions for the monk. The monk asks in surprise if Mr. Su is letting him go. Su asks with a smile what the monk expected from him because he did not plan to invite him to dinner. The monk was preparing for the worst, but he was glad that the great gentleman let him go, thanking him for it. Su extends his hand to the monk, saying that since he is not a charlatan, they are now colleagues and should work together. The monk, looking at Su's hand, slightly sheds tears and says that he has a very kind heart. Wiping his tears, the monk tells Su that the Taoists are going through hard times, because they are poor and are not perceived because of charlatans. Su, holding his head, does not fully understand how he can help them in return by offering 1 million for his colleagues in need. The monk was shocked by such a sum of money. He continues to thank Mr. Su, adding that his statue will be made in front of the temple. Su was outraged that people with abilities led rather miserable lives. The guy approaches his girlfriend and invites her to have dinner together, to which he receives a negative answer. Su cuddled up and hugs the girl, saying not to be so jealous of his spirit. The girl hands Su the phone, offering to try the dishes in this restaurant. Su reads on his phone about the great disciple of the king of cuisine, Chen Fan. The girl adds that this chef has many awards and that he is the best chef. Su was impressed by this, wanting to visit this restaurant. There was a huge line of people waiting to try the food of the disciple of the kitchen king at the restaurant. Su getting out of the car orders the ghost to stay in the car. Upset, the spirit nevertheless agrees. The girl is excited by such a large queue, realizing that they are unlikely to be able to get through today. Sue takes the girl's hand as he walks to the front of the line, adding that they haven't even tried yet. Approaching the first in line, Sue asks how much they are willing to give up their place for. The guy and the girl were surprised by this statement, explaining that they were not some poor people and his measly money did not interest them. Sue asks to look at the amount of the check before making a final answer. The girl is surprised that he even gives a check and not money. Seeing the number of zeros on the check, the couple cannot believe their eyes. Sue walks into a restaurant hand in hand with his girlfriend. A couple remains at the entrance, taking their leave. The couple standing behind begins to argue that they should have left earlier and then they would have gotten rich. Sitting down at the table, the girl asks if it's too provocative to pay for a line. Sue says he's trying to be more modest. At this moment, the system sends a notification about the completion of the task. Sue is surprised by this. The system offers to open a secret gift. Sue agrees, suspecting that it is all because of what the monk told the others in the monastery. This contributed to the completion of the task. The system brought out a secret new one in front of Sue's eyes, an increase in charm of 300%. Sue looked at the phone and did not see any differences, suspecting that the skill worked somehow differently. Girl Sue, blushing, says that she began to feel an inexplicable attraction to him. Sue did not understand what she was talking about. The girl under the table lifts her leg, reaching for Sue's leg. Sue suspects that his charm skill works like an aphrodisiac on people. At this time, the waiter came to the table asking what the couple would order. Sue still couldn't stop thinking about the new skill. Taking the menu, Sue begins to look for the restaurant's signature dishes, adding that he plans to do physical activity in the evening. The waiter offers Sue a set dinner from the chef, to which Sue agrees. The girl, embarrassed, asks not to say such things in public. Sue looked questioningly at the girl, saying that she had nothing to do with it, because he still had work to do after the restaurant. The system prompts Sue to take the next weekly identity, which Sue immediately uses. The system successfully retrieves a new identity calling it, King of the Kitchen. This meant that the hero is now a gifted chef, but no one knows his name. Calling him the King of the Kitchen, there was a task to open the best restaurant in the whole world in a month. Sue is surprised by such a coincidence, mentioning that right now he will have to evaluate the cooking of the famous disciple of the Kitchen King. The waiter gradually places all the dishes on the table, presenting them as a set of dishes from the chef. The man wishes the couple bon appetit. The girl decides to be the first to try, and she was very surprised by the amazing taste. The girl could not stop, calling it the food of the gods, for which she did not feel sorry for any money. Sue, having examined all the dishes, felt that they did not meet his standards. After all, the color, taste and smell did not match. Standing on the balcony, the chef of the establishment looks at his backside, adding that on this day there are more guests than always. Standing next to him is the manager. He decides to support the chef, considering him much better than the legendary King of the Kitchen. The chef asks not to speak about his teacher like that, because he is just learning. The man adds that although he is still young, he will definitely be called the King of the Kitchen. The chef notices Sue sitting. The guy didn't even touch his food. Sue cuts off a piece of meat and examines it closely. The girl decides to find out why he doesn't eat. Having tasted the meat, the guy immediately spits it out into the trash can. People sitting in a restaurant pay attention to the guy. Wiping his mouth, Sue adds that this is not tasty at all. The guy allows the girl to eat everything herself. People in the hall are outraged by this statement. The chef, seeing this, asks Sue why he said it wasn't tasty. People were surprised that the chef paid attention to the guy. Sue, with a smile, tries to justify himself by saying that the man just heard it and he just has a stomach ache. The chef, laughing, turns to the manager to warn the security not to let in such hillbillies without taste. Calling Sue an idiot, the chef leaves the balcony. At the last moment, Sue asks him to stop, adding that he initially did not want to disgrace him publicly and expressed himself too softly, because in his opinion the food is pure slop. The people in the room were amazed at such a loud statement. Out of anger, the chef calls him a coward if the guy doesn't want to try again. Sue continues to say that the food prepared must meet the standards, which are violated here. After all, the client comes for the sake of appetizing and provocatively tasty food. Sue adds that he was only able to take a couple of bites. In his opinion, this is no good. The cost of the dish does not correspond to the declared quality. The restaurant manager states that everyone who came before him had only good things to say about the dishes, suggesting that the guy is the problem. Sue calls this success a strategy of hunger marketing because of the long queues. People are ready to eat anything and be happy. People begin to listen to Sue's words, confirming that the food is indeed quite ordinary. The chef calls himself a student of the king of the kitchen and that he will not fall for such cheap tricks. Sue, holding his chin, tries to remember the so-called student. The chef was confused after hearing this. He could not imagine that this was the real king of the kitchen. Sue points his finger at the guy and asks since when he became his student, because they only met once after greeting each other at the hotel. The chef, having made a slip of the tongue, asks where he is from, and immediately corrects himself, knowing that this is all slander. The manager, supporting him, shouts in the same way. Sue adds that he assumed that there would be people who would use the name of the king of the kitchen. The manager was indignant. How could Sue say such a thing if he is not the king of the kitchen? The chef supports the manager, saying that he cannot know this, threatening to call the police. Sue says with a calm face that he is the king of the kitchen. All the people in the restaurant were surprised by such a loud statement. Everyone present asked if the guy was really the king of the kitchen, to which Sue assured that it was him. The manager, coming closer, shouted at Sue that he was completely different from the king of the kitchen, calling him a psycho who staged this whole performance. Sue points his finger at the chef and asks him to ask. The chef is starting to get nervous. He recalls how the king of the kitchen was dressed, adding that apparently he was very unlucky. Chen still doubts that this is the king of the kitchen. After all, the king's face was covered and it was difficult to see him. The manager, no longer understanding what is happening, asks the boss if this is really the same king. The chief loudly replies that it is not him, stating that he would recognize his teacher immediately. Sue says laughing, that he stubbornly stands to the end and that he assumes so. People standing nearby ask him to prove to them that he is truly the king of the kitchen. The chef thinks it over, refuses to believe that this is the king of the kitchen. He does not want to have a battle with the imposter. The chef, after a short pause, declares that he will not trust some rogue, much less allow him into his kitchen. People, understanding the complexity of the situation, agree with Chief Chen's decision. Sue decides to open his own restaurant, inviting Chen to come and evaluate his cooking skills himself. Secretary Sue is sitting in the office. She was outraged that President Sue did not attend work at all. Director Lee walked past the table with documents. The girl called him. The man, hearing the girl, stops, continuing to read the papers. The girl talks about her worries about the company. In her opinion, this reflects poorly on the company. Director Lee adds that he also thought about it, but a couple of days ago he personally visited the president. He explained that the president has everything under control, adding that if a company cannot operate without his presence, then that company is a failure. The girl is surprised by Su Xiong's foresight. The secretary's phone rang. The call was from Su. The guy called for an urgent matter. After hanging up, the director clarifies what President Su called, but the girl didn't know yet and hurries to go to him. The girl says goodbye to the director heading towards the exit. The director wishes her luck. The girl leaving the office assumes that Sue has been actively working all this time and plans to present a new gigantic project. Sue is standing at the entrance to the restaurant. He was surprised that the girl arrived so quickly. Sue shows the secretary a sign with the name King of the Kitchen. She doesn't quite understand what's going on. The girl, blushing from fatigue, decides to ask why President Sue has been working in the cafe all these days. Sue, thinking that the girl was joking, says that he is preparing the restaurant for its opening soon. The girl, sighing, apologizes for her stupidity. Sue decides to add that before this he was doing fortune-telling in the aisle. This drives the girl into a stupor. She didn't understand why the president was doing this. Sue invites the secretary to come into the restaurant. He called her to help. The girl immediately says that she doesn't know how to cook. A minute later, his girlfriend and secretary in waitress uniform stand in front of Chief Sue. They are a little embarrassed. Sue compliments that the girl's uniform suits them. He immediately says that he plans to work in the kitchen, and the girls should take orders to visitors. Girl Sue doesn't understand why he called them if he has a large company and could easily hire waitresses. Sue says that they are needed only for the first time, because hiring takes longer. A rude voice was heard at the entrance. Several men slowly approaching the restaurant were outraged that no one greeted them. They claim that the establishment is open on their territory and no one notified about it. The girls were concerned about the new visitors. Girl Sue suggests calling Sue's company security chief. Sue, with a calm face, calls the bandits clients. inviting them to come to the restaurant and taste his dishes. One of the men says that the restaurant is located on their territory, which is why they are now obliged to pay them for protection, otherwise, the restaurant will not have time to open. Sue smiles and invites the racketeers to first go to his restaurant and try his dishes, adding that if they don't like the food, then in addition to the money, he will add 20,000 on top. The men were surprised to hear such money, calling Chief Sue stupid. The men sat down at the table. One of them suspected that Sue was stalling for time, not wanting to pay them. The bandit boss, folding his hands in front of him, adds that he should just try. The boss of the company, having looked at it for a long time, adds that he really likes the girls in the establishment. The secretary, not knowing what skills Sue has, decides to ask if he even knows how to cook. Girl Sue assures that no matter how he cooks, the bandits will not do anything to him. The secretary, unable to calm down, still plans to call the company's security service. The girls look into Chef Sue's kitchen. The door is slightly open. Sue is standing in the kitchen. He is cooking something in a cauldron over high heat. After a moment, he quickly slices the fish, ridding it of the bones. The secretary is surprised when she calls President Sue a cook. The boss of the bandits hits the table, unable to wait any longer, threatening that he will now begin to destroy the establishment. At this moment, Chef Sue comes out of the kitchen along with the waitresses, wiping his hands as he presents his dishes. Sue smiles and apologizes for the delay, citing the fact that he hasn't cooked for a long time. The man begins to doubt the quality of the food. After all this was prepared by a newbie. Smelling the smell of food, the bandit boss blushed. The men looked in surprise at everything that Chief Sue had prepared. Sue invites the guests to try his food, adding that it is very important for him to hear their criticism of the dishes. The bandit boss is trying to lie that he doesn't like it at all, and most likely Sue will have to prepare the promised 20,000. At the same moment, the rest of the bandits overturn their plates and begin to eat to their heart's content. The man got up from his chair and was outraged by this. Sue and the girls are surprised by the reaction to his food. Men argue with each other at the table. The boss of the bandits asks to leave some for him too. The rest are unable to tear themselves away from their plates. Having finished eating, the plates on the table were licked sparklingly clean. The bandits leaned on their backs and discussed how wonderful it was for them. Sue, approaching the table, reasons that seeing their faces, they probably liked his dishes. The men, confused, try to come up with excuses. Sue folds his hands and looks at the bandits seriously. Unable to contain themselves, they thanked Chef Sue for such cooking. Each of them remembered something different in the dish. Sue says goodbye to the men, inviting them to come see him again. Girl Sue was surprised by such generosity from the bandits. A girl comes into a restaurant asking about a waitress vacancy. There is a huge line of people waiting to try the food of the king of cuisine at the Sue restaurant. The sign says that in 3 days they attracted all the foodies. The Kitchen King's student is outraged that he has a competitor spoiling his business. The phone on the table rang. It was the director of the company. The man greets him with a trembling voice. From a telephone conversation, you can understand that the director of the company is not happy with this turn of events, because his business is collapsing and he is losing money. The student of the king of the kitchen assures that this is a charlatan, because the real king of the kitchen is much older than some half-educated student. The director shouts into the phone that his business is collapsing because of this scammer. The man assures that tomorrow he will decide everything and bring him to clean water. The director asks not to disappoint him again by hanging up. The man angrily twirls the knife in his right hand, saying that he no longer cares who is the king of the kitchen or a charlatan, because he is preventing him from making money. Out of anger, the man sticks a knife into a photograph lying on the table, adding that he must die. The photo shows Su Sun. There is a huge queue at the King of Kitchen restaurant. Everyone wants to try the divine food. People who just arrived are very surprised, doubting that the restaurant is so tasty that there is such a line to stand in. One of the men standing in the crowd turns to them and asks if they are joking, because now everyone is talking about this restaurant and the dishes there are first class. The door in front of the line opens, making people incredibly happy. In front of them are 3 waitresses from whom they immediately fall in love. The waitresses sweetly greeted visitors to the restaurant of the King of Cuisine. The girls, smiling, remind you that the menus are on the tables, and that people can also order food through the terminal. The waitress takes the check from the terminal. Sue is working in the kitchen at incredible speed. At this time, the spirit calls out all the orders for each table. Sue, feeling dizzy from so much information. Sue emphasizes that the waitresses at his restaurant are first-class models and that he did not expect Yen to come to help him because she is not from a poor family. Sue, having finished his work day, sits at one of the tables drinking tea. The remaining guest is sitting at the next table. The girl emphasizes that as soon as the last client finishes the meal, the working day will be considered over. The man abruptly stands up from the table and moves to the side. Holding his cap, he asks the waitresses where he can wash his hands. The girls, smiling sweetly, tell him where he needs to go. The girls are glad the hard-working day is over. Sue, without letting it show, notices that the visitor is behaving strangely. The next day, an even larger line forms at the restaurant, shouting that they want to taste the dishes of the king of cuisine. A police car drives up to the restaurant. People turn around in surprise. One of the officers asks to seal the restaurant door. A waitress comes into Sue's office warning that the police have arrived. Sue, not surprised, says that he was waiting for them yesterday. The girl is surprised that Chief Sue knew in advance that the police would come. Sue smiles and offers to go with him and meet the guests. A journalist is standing outside the restaurant reporting on the incident at the King of Kitchen restaurant. The policeman shows his ID and asks who is in charge of the restaurant. There are several more police officers at the entrance. Girl Sue decides to ask what's going on, offering her help. At this time, Sue comes out of the office, saying that he is the boss. He decides to listen to what is happening in the restaurant. But, with a serious face, the police decide to give Sue a chance to confess without formalities. Sue pretends that he doesn't understand what he needs to confess and what he might be suspected of. Sue shows with his hands that he doesn't know what the problem is, suggesting that it could be a false call. The senior police officer waves the officers at the entrance to let the witness through. A student of the King of Kitchen enters the restaurant, grinning. At the entrance, the journalist adds in surprise that this is a student of the King of the Kitchen and they may well have a war between restaurants. Mocking, Sue calls the guy a kid, asking why he only now came to congratulate him on his discovery. The man considers Sue a fraud, adding that his real teacher would never reveal his identity. Sue, grinning, asks why he considers him a scammer, because scammers cannot cook really good food. People outside are outraged by this statement, asking the student to quickly leave and let them enjoy their food in peace. The senior officer asks him to hurry up and tell him where exactly what they came for is located. The man points his finger at the pantry, saying that it is in one of the bags. The waitresses were surprised by this statement. The senior officer orders the others to inspect the premises. Girl Sue still didn't understand what was going on and why the police were there. Sue invites the others to sit down and talk at the table. Sitting down at the table, Sue asks what exactly the police came to look for. Disciple of the King of the Kitchen, forgive me, don't pretend, because he knows well why they came. The police, having completed the search, return with a strange package. They assured that they found one bag of seasonings in which there was nothing at all. The king's disciple was surprised by this statement and stood up from the table. The man pulls the package out of the police's hands, saying that they don't even know what it should look like. After checking the bag, the man makes sure that the bag is empty. With a smile, Sue asks what his student is trying to find, adding that maybe he can help. Chen, angry, asks Chief Sue to shut up, saying that he will definitely find evidence. The policeman says that they received a tip that poppy straws are being added to food. Sue says in surprise that this is a serious violation and that even so it is difficult to get it. The man, unable to find the poppy straw, angrily accuses Sue that it was he who hid the evidence. Pointing his finger at Sue, he assures that he hid it somewhere in the kitchen. Sue, getting up from the table, suggests in this case that his entire restaurant be searched, but only in the presence of journalists. The man looks at Sue angrily, mumbling to himself that he will show him something else. Sue inviting journalists to the restaurant, he offers to record the search live, to which the journalists immediately agree. The search is in full swing and everyone in the restaurant cannot find anything. The waitress decides to quietly ask Sue if this Chen planted the poppy seed somewhere in the restaurant. Sue assures her that she shouldn't worry, after all, he has everything under control. He knew exactly which bag Chen put the mac in for him. The girl is surprised that Sue knew all this. Sue says the fact is that he has a hidden camera. Chen sits on the kitchen floor, wondering where the hidden poppy could have gone. Chief Sue and a police officer enter the premises. Sue asks if he found the so-called evidence. The man, shouting at Sue, tries to find out how he found the previously hidden bag. Sue, brushing it off, declares that he does not know what he is talking about and how he was supposed to hide something that he had not seen before. The police officer declares that giving false testimony is also a violation, inviting the guy to the station. Coming out of the restaurant, people were angry at such a long wait. Most of the crowd shouted at the Kitchen King's disciple. Sue, leaning against the wall, decides to also bring charges against the student for the presence of poppy straw. The Kitchen King's student sends him to hell, claiming that he has never done anything like this. The police officer warns Chief Sue that he must have evidence to press charges. Sue reminds that proof was not needed to mistype his restaurant, so he offers to inspect Chen Fan's restaurant as well. Without hearing the officer's answer, Shei Fu opens the door of the police car. The policeman was at a loss. Entering the restaurant, Chen immediately began to claim that although Sue managed to get rid of the evidence, his kitchen was clean from the very beginning and nothing like this had ever happened. Holding his face, Sue calls the guy self-confident. The officer allows Chief Sue to inspect the kitchen and if he finds something, let him tell them. Sue enters the kitchen not thinking that he will find something forbidden. His interest was more to look around the kitchen and find something useful. Chen calls Sue an idiot, explaining that he is deceiving the police and is simply taking revenge for the inspection of his restaurant. The officer looks at the guy angrily, demanding that he shut up. Looking around, Sue finds something under the sink. Having taken it out, he shows it to the officer, saying that he has never seen anything like this before. The police were very surprised by the discovery. The officer, having examined the evidence, claims that it is a dried poppy flower. Chen, panicking, asks if they are sure of the find. He claims that he has never had such things in his kitchen. Chen, panicking, begins to point his finger at Chief Sue, shouting that it was he who set him up. Waving it off, Sue adds that he has nothing to do with it. After all, they themselves allowed him to look around and this is what his search led to. The police officer invites several more employees into the kitchen to look for more evidence. The police begin to inspect everything, including all cabinets, bedside tables and tables. Chen nervously approaches the police officer, claiming that he was framed and that it was all set up by the experienced swindler Sue. One of the police officers, searching another locker, finds a huge safe. He immediately reports the discovery to a police officer. The officer turns to Chen and asks what kind of safe this is and who it belongs to. Smiling, Chen claims that this is his safe, because every respected person has his own secrets that it is better for others not to know, which is why he installed a personal safe in the kitchen. Wiping his nose, Chief Sue hints to the police that the poppy may be in the safe. Chen, angry, calls him a liar, offering to open the safe himself. Opening the safe, the guy states that the poppy could have gotten into the kitchen in any way, because many people pass through it, but his safe is a different matter, only he knows the password. Having opened the safe, there were securities on the top shelf, and a strange bag on the bottom. The guy can't believe what he sees. The police immediately detain the guy and wring his hands. Taking the package from the safe, the police officer states that there is a lot of weight here, which could serve as a real sentence for the guy, up to life. The guy fearfully continues to claim that it was not him, suspecting that it was Chief Sue who set him up. The officer refuses to listen to the guy, explaining that he should stop shifting responsibility for what he did to others, because the evidence was found in his personal safe. Sue, thinking about it, realized that his spirit had thrown this bag inside the safe. He adds out loud that this cannot be the work of a higher power. Arriving back at the restaurant, Chef Sue is greeted by a crowd of journalists. They were glad to have the guy back. Journalists immediately began asking various questions. They were interested in why the king of the kitchen had been hiding for so long and only now decided to return. Chef Sue tells everyone that cooking is just a hobby for him and has nothing to do with the main activity of the director of a huge company. The girls listening to Sue shyly praise his charisma and beauty. A long limousine pulls up to the restaurant. A man in a business suit gets out of the car and heads towards the crowd. Approaching Chief Sue, he shows his document from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He asks the chef to prepare dinner for the evening for foreign diplomats. Sue, stepping aside with the agent, immediately warns that he is not interested in working in other places. He prefers to cook in his establishment. Chief Sue also adds that he already has a huge queue of starving people, so the diplomats will first have to take a place in the queue. The guy asks to pass them on to the authorities, because in his establishment absolutely any person is welcome, no matter his position in society. The agents left behind were amazed at this answer, not understanding what to do with it. Heading towards the entrance of the restaurant, the crowd shouted their wishes and greetings to the king of the kitchen. Su notes that his task is to glorify the restaurant throughout the world, and not to hold banquets for every rich person. Unidentified men are sitting at the table in the office. There is a news report about the new haven of the king of cuisine. All the gourmets of the country have begun to gather in this restaurant, adding that at the moment the queues for the restaurant reach 10 days. One of those sitting at the table turns off the TV. Chairman of the National Culinary Association Lu Gi decides to clarify what the steelheads plan to do about it. The guy with glasses declares that they are no longer able to somehow resist this restaurant, because already dozens of foreign ambassadors want to visit Chef Su. Hitting the table, Lu declares that the Association of National Cuisine is the property of their country. He is not ready to be pathetic in front of some eatery. Another man sitting at the table adds that this chef is the king of the kitchen himself and he is not an ordinary person, so they will have to accept his greatness. Chairman Lu, thoughtful, says that the man gave him a good idea. Since the king of the kitchen is not an official status, Lu decides to give Chef Su the opportunity to confirm his status officially. Everyone at the table begins to object to the chairman's proposal. They didn't want Chief Su to rise above them. Lu explains to those sitting at the table that he is only giving a chance, but it is not necessary to immediately give away the status of the king of the kitchen. Realizing the genius of the plan, the men immediately responded approvingly. After all, in this way Chief Su can disgrace himself and completely lose his status. Chairman Lu adds that he expects diplomats from Japan in a few days, hinting to invite them to bring the best cook with them and hold a competition for the best cook. The bespectacled man points out that if Su Sun loses this, it will be a blow to the pride of their citizens. This does not stop the chairman. He believes that this is a trifle and their people will survive this, but Chief Su himself will be forever nailed to the board of shame. Crushing an apple in anger, Lu adds that it is he who influences whether Japan wins or loses. Standing in the kitchen, Chef Su sneezes. The spirit decides to ask if he is sick. Su suspects that at the moment someone is remembering him, and definitely not in a good way, assuming that it is Chen Fan who remembers him while he is being closed. The waitress standing at the entrance of the restaurant asks everyone to respect the queue. One of the people in line is indignant that he has been standing for a long time, suggesting that they expand the restaurant area. A bus arrives at the entrance and a large number of people in business suits get off. They were glad they were able to get to the restaurant. Several guards run up to the line, demanding everyone to disperse. Because all the places for today have been reserved, people start shouting indignantly that they have been standing in line for a long time and are not ready to leave so easily. The waitress asks to call Su Sun, because in her opinion there was a serious showdown on the street. One of the men in a suit warns ordinary people that if they do not want to act in a good way, then he will act in a bad way. People look at him in surprise. The man swings his arms in anger, at which time Chief Su catches his hand. Su looks at the man in the suit with a serious face, asking who he is and why he behaves this way. The guy looks at Su in confusion. The agent, pointing his finger at Su, begins to shout that he did not have the right to raise his hand against a civil servant while on duty. Su, grinning a little, adds that he just put his hand on his shoulder, and the agent himself began to scream like a girl out of fear. The people standing in line begin to mock the agent in unison. The man looks at Chief Su, confused. Su declares that he does not see any civil servant in front of him, but just an arrogant guy who is trying to get ahead of the queue. The crowd begins to support Chef Su. They were glad that they stood up for them, giving them a chance to still get into the restaurant. The man clenches his fists indignantly. Several more people in business suits walk towards him from behind. The agent immediately explains himself for his wrongdoing, believing that he did the right thing. After all, they had booked all the seats and he needed to disperse the entire crowd. Chairman Lu slaps him in the face with all his might. He explains to the agent not to communicate with people like that and not to put himself above others, adding that his behavior disgraces everyone. Lu orders the agent to get out of his sight, because why should people leave because of some guy? The guy is holding his face and trying to apologize. The waitresses standing aside think the guy's boss is decent. Secretary Su doubts Chairman Lu's integrity. Extending his hand, Lu introduces himself as the chairman of the Culinary Association. People start taking pictures of the chairman, because the association itself has come to evaluate the kitchen, the king of the kitchen. Shaking hands, Chairman Lu adds that he apologizes for his subordinates. calling them mediocrities. Su admires the chairman in the way he runs the association. Pointing to the men behind him, the chairman asks that foreign guests be allowed to skip the line to appreciate Chef Su's culinary skills. Chief Su immediately objects to this, explaining this in such a way that in his establishment the rules are the same for everyone, in the end, adding that if there is extra money in the association's budget, then they can offer it to people already in line and buy a place. Smiling, the chairman says that he will convey this to foreign diplomats. People, one after another, offer to buy their place in line. The man does not react to this in any way as he heads towards the bus. Girl Su clarifies why Su drove away such respected people, because he could have offered to book seats for any other day. Chef Su assures that there is no need to worry about the association, because they didn't just come to eat. The chairman's face was gloomy. Su adds that they came to devour him. In the evening, foreign diplomats were able to enter the restaurant. They shouted with delight how delicious everything was prepared. The waitresses were perplexed how foreign diplomats spoke Chinese so well even without using translators. Chairman Lu assured that this is normal for foreign embassy employees, adding that they have been in their country for a long time and knowing Chinese is their profession. Embarrassed, the chairman says that he cannot note how beautiful the waitresses are in their establishment. Holding the glass in his hand, Chef Su believes that he is sure the chairman did not come to look at the waitresses, by asking what Chairman Lu really wants. Clapping, the man emphasizes that it was not for nothing that people called Chef Su, the king of the kitchen. He was surprised by the guy's intelligence and insight. He adds that he really came for an important matter. Looking down, Su asks why he said, among the people, considering that in the highest professional community he is not considered such. The man begins to brush it off, assuring that he did not mean anything like that. Adding Chairman Lu invites Chef Su to officially confirm his status as the king of the kitchen, considering it unfair to the guy. Girl Su clarifies how exactly Su should confirm his status. Smiling evilly, the man lowers his head, pretending to be thinking about how to help. He adds that there needs to be evidence that Mr. Su has made a major contribution to the development of cooking. Not interested in such a proposal, Su heads to the restroom, warning the chairman that he is not at all interested in this. Lu is amazed that the guy refused such an offer. The man is confused and says that there is another one, but Chief Su closes the door behind him, wanting to go to the toilet. The waitresses apologize for Su's behavior, citing his rude nature. The chairman asks not to apologize for this, citing the guy's youth. In his thoughts the man wanted to pay for such humiliation, ruining his reputation. In the restroom, a spirit flies up to Su, trying to find out what exactly that man wants. He is the master. Chief Su, going about his business, explains that he understood everything on the street. This man is not who he seems. The girl calls him a bastard. The girl's spirit was already planning to fly away, so Su asks her to return for an errand. The girl asks if Su has come up with a plan. The guy adds that his task is to make the restaurant famous throughout the world, and this man, trying to ruin everything, will give him this chance. Chief Su instructs the girl to keep an eye on the man, and as soon as she finds out something important, she should immediately tell him. The girl politely agrees with the order. Coming out of the restroom, Su waits for the chairman's hand, apologizing for leaving at the wrong time. The guy asks the waitress to call a plumber, because there is no water in the toilet and he couldn't wash his hands. Sitting down on the chair, Chief Su takes the last napkin, wiping his hands. Su clarifies what the second proposed path is. The man was angry that the guy shook his hand and also took the last napkin. Chairman Lu says that in 3 days diplomats from Japan will arrive and with them will be the best cook in Japan, Sadako Tsu. He invited Su to fight him in a culinary duel. Chef Su clarifies that isn't Kosher Sai the best cook. The chairman states that Kosi Sai passed away 3 months ago, and this is his student who has already surpassed his teacher. With a smile, Lu asks if Chief Su agrees to the duel. Su had one condition before approval. Chairman Lu smiles sarcastically. The man wanted Chief Su to agree, and he planned to ruin the guy's reputation later. The chairman looks questioningly at the guy sitting opposite him. Chef Su with a smile offers to hold the competition in his haven of the king of the kitchen. Panicked, the chairman's face changed. He tries to explain that it will all be live and the venue should be the National Exhibition Center. Su shrugs off the man's words, adding that he understood everything. Getting up from his chair and heading to the kitchen, Su says goodbye to the chairman. Out of despair, the man asks Chef Su to stop, saying that they will spend everything in the haven of the king of the kitchen. Scoffing, Chief Su asks the man whether it will be difficult for them to do this. The chairman waves it off. Holding his head, Chef Su reflects that his establishment is too small for all the guests. Chairman Lu encourages him to think things through. Chief Su takes out his project plan and hands it to the chairman. He says he already has ideas on how to expand, but needs a little financial help. The chairman takes the plan and reads what is written there. The guy looks at the chairman with enthusiasm. He adds that he plans to make his restaurant inside an expensive hotel with a rather expensive interior. The man, covered in sweat, tries to explain to Su that they don't have enough money in the budget. Once again, Chief Su says goodbye to the chairman, which makes him confusedly ask him to stop, because he will find the money. Touched, Chief Su shakes hands with the chairman through tears. The guy explains that he has already organized everything and he only needs 70 million. The man shouts that they agreed on this. The chairman's car leaves. Chief Su says goodbye to the car. The waitresses standing behind were perplexed, because Chief Su himself had enough money to pay the expenses. The guy smilingly explains that he wants the chairman's adventure to cost him dearly. Sitting in the car, the chairman angrily types something on his phone. He's worried about asking for such large sums. The chairman calls the unknown person, holding the earpiece. He begins a dialogue. In the front seat is the spirit of Chief Su, listening to the chairman asking the guy's opponent to prepare better and not disgrace the country. Holding his chin, the chairman understands that he will be able to recapture 70 million in the future. The shot changes to Su Sun's beautiful 3-story mansion. Having scattered all his clothes, the guy is fast asleep on a luxurious bed. Someone is trying to get into his room. Passing by scattered clothes, an unknown person approaches the bed. A girl wearing only a shirt stands over the sleeping Su. The guy is fast asleep without reacting to the girl. The girl reaches out her hand to the face of the sleeping Chief Su. With a serious face, the guy suddenly takes out a knife and swings at the girl. Instantly turning her over, he sits on top of her, warning her not to move. The girl, frightened, cannot say a word. The guy, realizing who is in front of him, puts the knife behind his back. Su clarifies why the girl came to his room. The girl still could not come to her senses. Blushing, the girl wipes her eyes. She adds that she was scared in the restaurant, so she went to look for an empty room. The girl begins to cry loudly because Su scared her. The guy is trying to calm the girl down. Girl Su runs into the room with indignation that she cannot leave him even for a minute. The guy points his finger in confusion at the girl sitting next to him. He tries to explain that he was sleeping and was not to blame for anything. From the street side, through a closed window, you can see Su's girl hitting him with a towel. At the entrance to the new restaurant of the King of Cuisine there are a large number of journalists. Everyone is trying to record the broadcast of such a cult event. Chairman Lu's car arrives at the restaurant, smoking a cigar. He looks irritably at the journalists. An unknown man in a white suit gets out of the car. The chairman, distracted by the guy, supports him. All the journalists and people standing at the entrance were excited by the unknown man who came. A guy with a model hairstyle and a luxurious white suit heads to the restaurant. There is a black car in the background. Journalists, without stopping the broadcast, continue to praise the famous chef Sadako Tsu. At this time, Chief Su is still sleeping in the bed, with both girls lying next to him. The spirit screams at Su to wake up, causing him to reluctantly open his eyes. The spirit of the girl stood indignantly next to the bed. Su is frightened by the ghost he sees. The guy continues to look at the spirit with frightened eyes. The girls wake up rubbing their eyes. Covering her mouth with laughter, the girl's spirit mocks that Su sleeps with female employees. Chief Su begins to wave his hands. Su's gaze changes, looking at the spirit. He does not understand why the girl stopped following Lu Gi. The spirit does not understand what this question is about. Su's face becomes frightened at what he heard. Sadako, having changed into a chef's uniform, is already standing at her table. Chief Su's desk is still empty. The jury and the public are wondering where Chief Su has gone and whether he will come at all. Chairman Lu was glad that Chief Su might be late. The host of the event is at a loss as to why Su Sun still hasn't shown up, because there's only a minute left. One of the journalists points at the entrance and notices that Chief Su is coming. The guy, accompanied by several security guards, heads to his workplace. Sadako grins at what he sees, amused by it. The presenter approaches Su's table and brings him a microphone for his introductory remarks. The guy grinning explains that he just overslept. The people behind the fence are surprised by what they hear. After thinking about what was said, all the journalists notice the hidden meaning in Chief Su's words supporting him. The guy, laughing, waves it off, because that's not what he meant. People continue to support him. Sadako, clenching his fist tightly, was outraged by such impudence. Rising from his chair, Chairman Liu asks the audience to calm down and not interfere with the competition. Sadako looks at Chief Su angrily. Su does not react to his opponent in any way, looking only at the jury. After the journalist's words, Chief Su's guards look around in confusion. The waitresses also don't know what they need to do. At this time, Chief Su did not react at all to the preparation, only yawning at this time. People look questioningly at the actions of the great king of the kitchen. Sadako's assistant brings in a huge tray covered with a yellow tablecloth. The assistant removes the tablecloth. Sadako watches her actions with folded hands. Luxurious lakidra lies in ice on a tray. One of the jury looks at the fish in surprise. He realizes that this is an incredibly rare fish. The host turns her attention to Chef Su. She doesn't understand why Su still hasn't shown his ingredients. Chief Su slowly approaches his opponent Sadako's desk. The guy looks at Su's actions in bewilderment. Su approaches the lakidra, bending over and examining it. Pointing his finger at the fish, Su asks to share the lakidra with him. Sadako looks at Chief Su indignantly. Chef Su with a stupid smile asks to share such a huge fish with him. Sadako shouts at him angrily. Su indignantly leaves the opponent's table. Sadako laughs at the guy. The presenter, with misunderstanding, tries to voice everything that is happening. She suggests that this is a psychological trick. Sadako angrily sharpens the knife while looking at Chief Su's actions. Su waves to his waitresses. They look at him in bewilderment. The smiling girls are thinking about what they should do now. On Chef Su's table there are not the freshest vegetables and ordinary small fish. The girls ask in confusion whether this is enough for the boss. The guy, smiling, asks them to return to their seats. Sadako smiles maliciously at what he sees. He is sure that he will win. Chef Su takes a bite of the carrot, noting that the audience will be closer to seeing the cooking of everyone's familiar food. The journalists sitting in the hall support Chief Su. All the other viewers watching on TV also shout out words of support for the guy. Sadako looks angrily at the guy while holding a knife. He is bothered by Chef Su's attitude towards cooking. The presenter announces the start of the competition. With all the skill, Sadako cuts the fish into thin pieces, removing absolutely all the bones. Chef Su does the same thing, but with his fish. Everyone notices the skill of the chefs. The jury is surprised by such skill and how much they fight on equal terms. Chairman Liu smiles while holding his chin, happy that his plan is working as he planned. Sadako finishes cooking and shows an amazingly beautiful fish lying on a pile of ice. Assistant Sadako presents the dish by bringing it closer to the jury. The men were surprised by such skill. One of the men notices how beautifully the dish is executed. Using chopsticks, take a small piece. The jury was pleased with such an unusual dish. All the judges raise their plaques with the highest score.